The 1970 film Airport kicked off the original disaster movie era. It's also what most directly inspired the classic comedy Airplane. But the film itself is a little different than later examples of the subgenre, and airport security has come a long way since 1970. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me, my co-pilot today, is David.
Remind me to send a thank you note to Mr. Boeing.
Yeah, because Boeing's reputation in the last 50 years has been going so swimmingly.
As soon as that line came up, I just cringed a little bit, like, ooh, that one didn't age well.
Yeah. Well, presumably they had like a nice little marketing deal with them for this movie, because obviously they had to have a plane manufacturer in the movie constantly. So
absolutely.
But yes. Today we start a new season, and we're kind of doing, for the third year in a row, a 70s disaster movie season at the start of the year. And we'd done so many of them now, we'd kind of left an entire franchise for the third time. So this season is 70s disaster season, but more specifically, it's airport season, because there was 4 of these. So this and the next 3 episodes will all be of the airport franchise, starting with the original film in 1970, just called Airport. And this is notable for a couple of reasons. One is that it kind of inspired Airplane, the spoof movie, and it also is kind of what kicked off the entire 70s disaster movie craze in the first place. As much as we talk about this later, obviously it's not as big and it's not doing as many destructive things as Poseidon Adventure and Tower of Inferno and all that want to do. They exist because this one came out and was a hit. This is what started it. So it's very important in the lineage of disaster movies, even if it feels less like a disaster movie because we're so used to the later ones that went bigger and went bolder. So
yeah, it strikes me that same sort of way as, you get it kind of gimmicks and stuff like that in theaters, 3D movies or whatever like that. And the first one may not be the best, but it sets the trend. It shows that these things can be profitable. And then they just kind of evolve the formula and the algorithm until it gets to a point where it's and here is where we reach our peak.
Yeah. Which does make it makes me fascinated to see what the sequels are like, because, the next one's from 1975 and that comes after a few of those other movies. So I'm curious to see how this franchise ups its ante in and of itself compared to the other ones. So,
yeah,
very curious.
Based off of this movie, I mean, no spoilers here because this is said pretty early on, but this movie, they spend a lot of time talking about financial stuff. I assume that by the third airport movie, it's just a movie of nobody wants to come to our airport anymore because bad things keep happening.
You assume it's the same airport.
Oh, that's true. I guess I assumed airport is talking about specifically this one, but I don't have any proof to that.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe it is the same airport in all 4 movies, but I mean, it could literally, it doesn't even have to be in the US. It could be a US plane going to anywhere on the planet. So, whatever.
Could be going to LA and there's a Mrs. McLean on board and uh-oh.
You try to tell me that Die Hard 1 is actually Airport 5? Just they pivoted?
Wouldn't it just be the best if you watched them together and they somehow managed to tie everything in the same?
I mean, if Airport 4 ends with a plane landing in LA, forgetting the fact that it's a decade too early, right? And we're going to assume that that's John McClane's plane. It's kind of weird that John never mentions to Holly whatever crazy thing happened on the plane. Yeah, we had an emergency landing and there was a whole thing going on. That'd be kind of wild. But anyway, so we'll get into everything in a second here, but of course I'll just warn you, we do start spoiler free. We'll give you a warning before we get to the spoilers somewhere in a little bit. Before we get to all that though, if you are enjoying the show, do hit the like button. It helps out a bunch on YouTube, and of course you can support the content and help keep the show coming and get bonus shows that we do every month over in Patreon, but I'll tell you more about all that at the end of the episode. So yeah, I think I had seen this before. I haven't seen the sequels before, but I'd seen this a good decade or so ago, and I didn't really remember too much about it, other than that it spent a lot more time setting characters up before the actual disastery part starts, because the movie's over 2 hours long, and it's a good... I mean, the actual disaster part's in the back half. I would say where the movie really starts moving, though, I would sort of count that as when we meet the character who's going to be responsible for what happens.
Right.
And that's about 35 minutes in. So I would say there's about half an hour of just almost soap opera level drama of just various characters who are important or in or around the airport or the plane that's going to be the focus of the story.
Yeah, but I mean, even if I think back to our previous seasons for 70s Disaster, there was always that kind of level. This one does take it to a more further extreme of how long it takes for like the action to start. But I think that that's always been a thing of we spend at least half an hour, 45 minutes of here's the ensemble cast, here's all the moving pieces and how they're all going to fit together later on.
Yeah, I think this feels a bit more old-fashioned, though, and I guess it makes sense because it's the oldest, technically, and it's obviously coming out, you know, it would have been shot in 1969, probably, so it's kind of coming out of this previous era. I think what sticks out to me is that the introduction of the culprit was something that in a film, even just a few years later, I'm not even talking about present day, but just a few years later, I think they'd have started sprinkling that in at the start. In fact, the opening scene might have been like him looking at his suitcase and like, oh, we'll establish the tension so that that's underlying throughout all the other stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas here, it's like, no, we're going to spend half an hour just talking about someone having an affair and this guy's married life and whatever, and then we'll start building the tension. No movie would do that after a certain point. This feels really old-fashioned the way this starts off.
I 100% agree with you, but I also kind of like it more because it's forcing me to focus on these characters because I don't know like which of them are going to be involved with this thing, where the like culprit actually is. So by going through all of the other characters first and saying, here's their role, here's what's going on with them, here's how they fit together, and then showing who the culprit's going to be, it makes it so I've already established all that previous stuff and I can just more focus on, okay, keep an eye on where the culprit is as we move about the previously established characters.
Sure. So yeah, the culprit has an explosive, and that's kind of what the movie's about, is what he's going to do with that and what happens if it goes off and so on and so on. So we'll get into all that properly in spoilers, but just to start things off here, before we even talk about whether either of us liked the film or not, I just want to ask you a question, actually. I'm going to start with a question.
You usually do, but right. I assume it's a different question.
So I'll get to the usual question in a minute, but this is less a quality question, though. This is more something specific. So once it was established in this movie that a character is going to take in this suitcase with an explosive in it, right?
Yes.
And he's going to the airport and all that. Were you thinking during this part of the movie, how is he going to get through security with that? Did that thought occur to your brain?
No. It really didn't, because I just assume that everything I think of as normal airport security started in 2001. And before that, you could literally walk in just wearing a jacket made of guns and no one would care.
Well, that's a ridiculous statement, what you just said. Because I'm sure going through like a scanner, a detector, was normal before 9/11. I'm sure it was. I feel like I saw that.
I mean, you say scanner detector. I don't think they had anything like MRI or X-ray at that point.
Well, no,
I think the most they would have is a metal detector. And if this guy's briefcase goes off on a metal detector, he could easily just say, it's literally anything. It's a stapler in there, and so be it.
Well, yeah, they could just look inside, though.
Yeah, but the looking inside thing, I think, is a modern thing.
Okay,
I think that's the part that's
you're saying as if I'm sounding ridiculous. Just because it's not X-rays doesn't mean that it. Like, no, metal detectors were absolutely a thing in airports before 9/11. Yeah. It'd be ludicrous to say they weren't. What I wasn't expecting in this movie, though, from 1970, is that there's not even that. It feels like, I mean, the fact that someone even like tries to like sort of catch him, like his wife tries to catch him, and she makes it all the way to the gate where the passengers are boarding the plane. You can't just go to there unless you've got a ticket at an airport. That's ludicrous.
No, you can. Nowadays, no, but you totally could back then.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying this movie is such a weird thing to watch for anyone who was born, like, I mean, even someone who was born in 1970, this movie's depiction of an airport is going to seem alien, because by the time the people born in 1970 were old enough to remember going into airports, it probably already changed so much. And certainly for anyone born from when I was born onwards, when by the time I was old enough to remember going to an airport, it was after 9/11, then, like, this is wild. It's the fact that he's able to just waltz in and he just keeps this case on him, and no one ever questions or checks it. Like, because I would think, okay, yeah, sure, maybe there's no like scans or anything, but at the very least, if it sets off the metal detector, I would expect whoever's like manning the device to be like, yeah, but I've got to check. I've got to just have a look and see what's in there.
So I Googled the same question that you're asking here,
Yes.
1970s airport security. And apparently, according to multiple sources here, in the very early 1970s, there was pretty much nothing. It was just, here you go, get on the plane, do whatever. Around 1972, 1973, they instituted universal screening, the stuff you're describing, because there were some hijackings around that time period.
Yeah, they all saw airport and they thought, that is that easy?
Yeah. Wait a minute, hold on. You telling me I could just bring a bomb on board? Yeah, and so 1973, there was, screenings and stuff like that, but then it got locked down in 2001 because apparently we got a bit lax in those 30 years.
Yeah. Because airport security was always something, well, it got more robust after 9/11. It definitely existed before then. It was definitely a place I viewed as having a reasonable amount of security, even if obviously, things were getting lax in some respects. But this is like waltzing to a train at a train station. Basically.
I would argue that they do make a point of that in the movie of showing there's one character who's like customs check or something like that, and he's so good at his job that he can just eyeball a person and know whether or not they're guilty.
But this is the part that was really making me think of this, is because he kind of basically has a line practically where he wishes that he could check people before they get on a flight, because all he does is check people and what they've got when they arrive. And I thought, yeah, dude, and in like 30 years time, that's going to be like standard and it's mandatory. Everyone has to do it.
Yeah.
Like the idea that he was having this thought of, I wish I could check before because maybe that guy looks fishy. I'm like, yeah, it turns out that's going to come in quite handy in the forthcoming years.
I'm just making a brief look here. There's a Wikipedia article of list of aircraft hijackings, and pre the 1970s, it's slim. There's not a lot. And then going into the 1970s, it beefs up severely. So it may have just been a frequency thing at that point.
I mean, I have to imagine it's just because, as you get further along and airports have been around, air travel's been around, more and more people are getting the idea and considering it as an option. So rather than any particular thing in the 70s that's causing it necessarily.
Yeah. No, definitely not. I mean, I do think there was probably a few that like were higher profile stuff.
Sure, yeah. Well, but that's like anything. If it's around long enough, people will get bigger and bolder ideas, and
absolutely. I mean, just to go on your earlier statement of like how alien it seems nowadays, I feel like we're going to approach that same sort of thing as I'd say the next 5-10 years. We're going to get it where the entirety of our generation coming up is not going to know anything about like floppy disks, old terminal line stuff, anything like that, and all of the customization, all of the ideas of like, you can make your computers to do this, that, and the other thing. It's all going to be stripped away to people who grew up as iPad kids and they were locked into this infrastructure of like, where's the apps?
I mean, I think we're already there, David. You just don't want to admit it.
Look, I'm going to hold on to whatever I can.
I have heard multiple people around, maybe a little older than us, but basically talk about how they know teenagers who refer to the save icon. Like, basically someone pulled out a floppy disk and said, what's this? And the
save icon,
a teenager says it's save icon, right? They don't know what a phone is. They know what the symbol is to make a phone call on their phone, but if you actually whip out a rotary phone, I mean, hell, I'm not even old enough to have ever seen a rotary phone in person, to be honest. Like, it's always been, keypads, but still, same idea. You whip out an actual physical landline and they're like, what?
Yeah.
What is this?
Every once in a while, I'll see those YouTube videos where it's like, we promised our kid $100 if they could dial our number on a rotary phone. And I'm like, come on, kids aren't that stupid. And then I watched the video.
To be fair, I've never used a rotary phone. I think I could figure it out, but I understand the theory of it, but I've never actually done it.
Yeah, the question is whether or not you can dial it before dialing something like 911 accidentally.
That's a good question, yeah. Yes. Presumably, though, none of your phone numbers in the US start with 911, just in case that's an issue.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they probably blocked that off.
Yeah.
That's I've never checked. I'm not going to check, but I assume so.
Well, because I'm assuming on a rotary phone, it just like once you've reached the end of whatever is going to count as a number, it just dials it. Whereas
Yeah.
on later phones, you hit enter or whatever when you're done. Like, hey, that's the whole number. Take it.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. It's everything still has the back end infrastructure, and it all depends on like the tone of the beeps. So whether you're plugged into a rotary phone or a cell phone, it's still just giving those beeps to the back end infrastructure. It's just the frequency at which it does it, like, changes, because the rotary ones, it does it as soon as you do the spin thing.
Ah, yeah, but if I was in the US and put in 911, but then cancelled it and didn't actually hit enter, it wouldn't ring it.
Probably not.
Yes.
I don't think. Again, not going to try.
No, definitely not. I'm sure because you have to hit enter. Or
Oh, you're talking about like on a smart. I thought you were saying on the rotary phone, like you
No,
do 911 and then hang up.
No, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying rotary phones, regardless, it would just like because it would count it as a number as you're putting it in. Whereas any modern phone,
Right.
Even a phone from the 90s, you have to hit like the green button at the end to say, "Hey, I'm done typing the number." Right? Yep. Accept it.
I want people to understand that every single episode of this season is going to start this way, with us just being like, man, these airports back then, crazy, and then spinning off on how old we are.
I think this one's getting the brunt of it because it's the first one. That said, though, we'll probably do a little update at the start of 75 to say how much have things changed in those 5 years since 1970.
You're just going to see that one dude with the X-ray wand and be like, there he is. Good job.
It's in the 70s, no, it's going to be like a big fridge-sized thing that they have to stand in front of.
Yeah, probably.
They don't have something that small with that technology in the 70s. Are you mad?
I'm sorry. I assume that everything is at the level of save icon because that's where I started.
So yes, yes, it's wild watching this with any like resemblance of modern airports in mind. But with that said, though, David, what did you think of Airport?
I liked it. I actually really did. I think every time we come around to a 70s disaster season, I'm always a little bit hesitant because I know that they're going to use this older film style. Like, again, what was it? Towering Inferno was almost like 3 hours long, I think. Maybe even longer than that. It just...
Well, it wasn't long. It was like 2 hours and 45 or something
2 hours 45. So yeah, it was this much longer movie. It's a much slower pace, but every single time when we get back into it, at least for the good ones, I'm always reminded that these guys knew that. And the pacing is very good, at least from the talented filmmakers, very good at keeping you into the movie. It keeps you interested. It keeps on doing things that are novel, and they do it well to the point where by the time, 2 hours have passed out of these longer movies, you don't even feel it. It feels like, oh, I've just been enraptured in this. And this is no exception to that, where I sat down, I saw it was going to be 2 hours, and I'm like, oh, okay, all right, well, let's see if it can hold my attention that long. But by the time it hit the hour mark, and like that's when things really started kicking off, I was still into it. Like, they did a great job of explaining, here's all the characters, here's all their relations with each other, getting you to care about that stuff. And by the time they introduce the idea of the bomb, you're already so engaged with the characters that, like, you kind of don't mind where this guy is for a while. Like, yes, you keep an eye on him whenever they check in and say, like, he's right here right now. You're like, cool, great. But is that character going to be able to make it on the plane in time? Like, you're almost caring about other things. Once they're in the air, obviously it's a very good high tension thing. You're straight up Hitchcock bomb under the table idea, but it's through and through a very well made movie.
I think it's a solid movie. I mean, I do think it is a bit slow to get started. I think the first half hour is basically just here's like all the personal lives of these like 3 or 4 characters that are going to be pivotal later on. I do think there's probably a more refined way to like get through a lot of the same material and like details without the amount of time that it takes. Because I do find though that once it introduces the culprit character, and I'm not trying to like this isn't avoiding the spoiler. I just can't remember his name. I'm just calling him the culprit for ease of
Guerrero.
There you go. But he once they introduce him though, and you start like that through line of he's got a plan, he's going to do something, and we're kind of following that as the other characters are kind of like going about their business. I think especially once there's like one of them has a hint that something might be off, and they start investigating things, and it kind of starts to lead to like just this natural unfolding tension. Once it gets to that point, I'm quite into it. I do think the first half hour though is, I think for modern viewers when they sit down to give this a try, I think that first half hour is going to be what like filters a lot of people out. I think a lot of people are going to just think it's not really doing anything. But that said though, once that stuff gets going, once it's in the air, there's a very particular like 20-minute period that I really, really like, especially. Which I don't want to spoil it, so I won't really specify.
Okay.
But there's a really solid, really good 20-minute section that I really like. But I think you can tell this is like a prototype of what then became the disaster movie in a lot of ways.
Right.
There's a lot of little things and decisions, and the way that it's almost like holding back a little bit in some ways, or at least it feels that way in hindsight, because I'm used to like a really high body count in these movies, and this one's a lot more reserved in that regard. Which is not a complaint per se. It's just an interesting observation. But yeah, no, I think it's a decent watch. But it's definitely not going to, like, when we get to like ranking and try to make a sort of top 10 of whatever of these disaster movies, I don't think this is one that I'm going to be fighting for to be high on the list.
I wouldn't say high on the list. Yeah, and I think again, this is one of those ones where it sets up the idea of what will become a disaster movie, and I think that it does have a high quality to it. You're saying the first 30 minutes are a filter for modern audiences, and I wholeheartedly agree, but maybe it's just because you've shoved like 15 of these 70s movies in my head. Like, it's not as bad as some of the other ones that we've been through. Like, at least this one, all of the characters they're showing me have these very distinct personalities. They have very clear ways. Like, you show me one of these characters, I'm not going to be sitting there hemming and hawing like, is that the lawyer character? Is that the one who's like religious? Like, no, this is absolutely burned in of here is their exact personality, what their role is here, either on the plane or in the airport, and what we are going to do moving forward. And I really appreciate all that, because it makes it more enjoyable to go through those first 30 minutes of boiling down where everybody's coming from, going to, and you then don't have to waste that time later on in the movie establishing these things in the middle of action. You can just evolve them naturally as we continue.
I think there's some things that are absolutely just kind of fluff, though.
There's fluff stuff in terms of like it doesn't impact the main plot in any way. It doesn't come back in any major way, but it's character development. It's making you care more about the characters.
Yeah, but I think even then you're disregarding some things. For example, right? So one of the main characters, right? Burt Lancaster's character, he like runs the airport, right? He's the general manager, I believe is the exact job title, but regardless, he's in charge of things, and we see him dealing with various things. But a big plot point for him early on is that him and his wife are not in good terms, and his wife is mad that he's staying at the airport tonight because he was meant to go to a dinner with her, and she calls him a few times, eventually comes down to the airport to talk to him, and has a fight, and it basically, I mean, we're not in spoilers yet, but let's just say it ends with them saying, let's just get a divorce, right? And that's kind of where it all comes to a head. I think that plot line gets a lot of screen time, takes several sequences, because you've got like at least 2 phone calls, maybe 3, plus the big sort of like actual in-person visit at the end, and it's a constant sort of bugbear. And because it's wrapped up though before any of the actual rest of the movie starts, like it's all tied up in a bow before we even get the plane in the air. So okay, you want to set up that he's having an unhappy married life, you can do that. And you can set up that, maybe there's a flirtation with someone else, you can do that too. These are all fine, and that's the stuff that I think is important. But I don't think you have to spend this much time. I think one unhappy conversation with the wife would have done. It would have got the point across. I don't think you need to do the whole thing.
I get what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying there. It would require restructuring for what I'm about to say, but I think that if you were to take the same arc, if you were to take the same movements, but shift it out over the course of the movie instead, I'd be more frustrated that while this thing up in the air is happening, that the ex-wife thinks, I deserve this time right now, and the husband gives it to her, I'm happy that it was all dealt with in the beginning, so that way we don't have to pretend like, okay, let's take a step away from that and then do this instead.
I'm not suggesting they spread it out through all that stuff, though. I'm saying you just, like...
Slim it down.
Yeah, vastly slim it down. Like, honestly, you just need to set up one or two key points, and then have, like, what kind of pays off a little bit at the end from it. But it spends a lot of time dealing with that. There's other relationships that get a bit more time as well, that I think at least there's something there where, you know, Dean Martin's character, when it sets stuff up for him and his girlfriend, it's like, okay, these are things that are clearly going to come into play and be a concern later on when the plot kicks off, and they are. So those are a bit more valid to spend time on. But honestly, the unhappy marriage with Lancaster's character, I do think's a bit of an anchor on that first half hour, because it takes up a lot of the screen time, and you really could lose a lot of it without changing really anything or what any of the outcomes are going to be.
Yeah. I agree. I do think that you could slim that down. The part that needs to be slimmed down to me is the old lady plot, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, but at least that's kind of funny.
Yeah, that's fair. But what I think actually needs to happen is actually the opposite of slimming it down. I think, yeah, maybe you could cut out one or two conversations, but most of it needs to stay to show that he is consistently choosing the airport over her. What needs to happen to make it a fully fledged plot is they need to lean in more heavily on his relationship with Tanya, the coworker character, because then that changes it from this idea of, oh, I have a bad marriage, which then wraps up in the first part, to the entire overarching idea of his relationship being able to blossom with this character otherwise.
I've got some more thoughts, but I can't really say them until spoilers, but yeah, I think it, given ultimately what it does with it, it didn't need to spend remotely that much time on that first section. And to be honest, Lancaster's character, in a lot of ways, like, his entire role could probably be slimmed down, if I'm honest. It doesn't feel like it's as important as a lot of the others.
I mean, the issue is that in the back half of the movie, nothing on the ground matters. There's exactly one subplot that matters, which is the only thing that's starting from the very beginning of the movie. But everything else that's going on in the ground is just kind of people waiting around to see if the plane situation's going to work out. Yeah.
Which is why it's actually a little bit strange that they made him one of the main characters and gave him that much, like, development, because ultimately he's not going to impact what's going on in the back half of the movie all that much. But I mean, I think there is a bit much time here, and I think it does stem from, like, an old-fashioned movie kind of, like, idea of, like, oh, we've got these big stars, we have to give them big sappy romance plots because that's what movies had with, you know, when you had stars in them, right? And that's what it feels like it's doing with a lot of its leads.
If I had to guess, this was based off of a book. It was a best-selling novel. If I had to guess, I would say that the novel is probably written from a dual protagonist viewpoint of Burt Lancaster's character and Dean Martin's character, like, switching off of they're describing the situation that's happening, and therefore it's just kind of adapting that part to screen and didn't really think of the fact of, oh, well, we just have to have him sitting here for a while and he's not actually doing anything.
Yeah, there's probably some truth in that. So, another thing I'll point out, actually, before we get into the cast directly, is that this movie loves to make use of the split screen. And not just a straight split screen either. It does a few sort of quirky ones as well. The one that's very consistently used, actually, is when we're in the cockpit with the pilots and they're talking to someone on the ground, usually at air traffic control of some kind, but there's a few different ones. It'll do this thing where whoever they're talking to will be in a circle in the middle of the frame between the two pilots, which feels a little bit old school and dated in a weird way. I'm not complaining, but that's what it is. My problem with this, though, is not the choice of the circular split screen to show that character with the others. It's more the fact that almost everyone they call for these scenes who talks to them in this little circle in the middle, I don't know what they were doing here. Like, they're going for such, you know, authenticity in the demeanor of these characters, but every single one of them is like speaking with the most boring tone and just like they're not emoting at all. You'd think the fact that they're helping a plane that's in great danger might have them like a bit tense or something, but no, they're like just drolly pointing out, go to this airport in this section. And there's like a bit of like
I get what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. For the audience's sake, most of these people inside the circles are air traffic control. And I'm just going to say, you don't want your air traffic control guy to be panicking. You want him to be speaking very clearly and very slowly to make sure all instructions are relayed accurately.
No, you're being reductive here. This is not a complaint of realism here. This is a complaint that they, like, all of them show not even like an inch of like a performance on their face. An air traffic controller, whilst they might be trained to keep cool and talk clearly into the microphone, you could still tell if they look stressed visually, right?
Hey, the last guy lit a cigarette before he started.
The pilots can't see them. They're allowed to sweat. They're allowed to look nervous, even if they're keeping their cool and doing their job properly. And also, speaking clearly doesn't necessarily mean sounding like you're depressed and you want to jump off a bridge somewhere, because that's how they all talk.
That's just working at air traffic control. That's just how they default there, is wanting to jump off a bridge somewhere.
Every single time they had one of these scenes where they called down, I started sort of going, oh, here we go again. Mr. Depressing is going to be in the little bubble. And sure enough, every single time, it looks like they're... And I get that they're looking down at data because they're supposed to be, but every single time it just looks like they're reading off the script to me. Like they're just looking down. They hired someone who's not an actor to look down and read off a script. Maybe that's what they did. Maybe they got real air traffic people to do this, and that's why the acting's so bad, is because they don't know how to act. They're just saying stuff.
I doubt it. Yeah, no. I did actually I have up here The Airport, the novel, and apparently one of the cut plot lines that's in the book that's not in the movie is Mel's brother, Keith, who's Burt Lancaster's character is Mel. He is an air traffic controller tormented by guilt due to him not realize the imminent danger of a mid-air collision. So there you go. There was a cut plot line of one of those ATC guys having actual depth.
Yes. Doesn't fix how bad these little performances are in the movie, though. So whatever decision that was, whether it was just poor direction, whether it was just a bad bunch of actors or not actors at all, it took me out of it every time, because you've got like these movie stars on either side of this little bubble performing, and then in this little bubble you've got someone just looking like they're reading out of a textbook.
I do wonder if this might have been kind of a thing. You were saying before how they probably got buddy-buddy with Boeing because of how often it's brought up of like, oh, these Boeing planes are durable. Everything's great about them.
Yes.
I wonder how much they were also buddy-buddy up to like the ATC and actual like airports and stuff like that. And as such, they kind of pulled off the thing that like Transformers does with the Army, where it's like, don't make us look bad. But specifically for the ATC, they were like, if people get too emotional in the ATC, then like they are asked to leave.
David, shut up!
No,
I'm not.
I know. I'm not talking.
Shut the. David, I'm not talking about them getting emotional. I'm talking about them sounding human.
I know. I get that. I'm saying, what if they tried it with them giving the like actual human performances of doing that, and then the people they were buddy up with the ATC were like, we're gonna need you to tone that down a little bit. And like they just started doing it in the robotic way that normal ATC agents do it, because they were like, all right, you guys want that, then so be it.
I don't know if I buy that the real air traffic control actually are this like depressed looking as they're doing this. Like I mean, actually
every time I've
that.
ever seen them portrayed in like a realistic way, like documentaries and stuff, it is like this. It is what like they are pretty much reading off a script, because that's what they're actually doing. They're just literally telling people numbers and levels that they need to get to. It's not supposed to be an actual like put some inflection in there like you're a McDonald's fast food worker of like, hi, how can I help you today?
I'm not saying they should. Look, they're terrible, okay? Point blank, right? You keep trying to make these weird justifications for it, but they're not good.
I'm looking for explanations, not justifications. I'm not saying here's the reason why
Look, I'm not saying we cut to them and they're holding a skull and doing Hamlet as they're like, oh, and doth go to heading 742. Blah, blah. Like, I'm not saying
to be
that.
or not to be, that is your heading.
I'm just simply saying, looking like, I don't know, they're a person who lives somewhere, that exists, that actually looks like, oh, maybe the fact that this is a high stress situation maybe shows a sign of some kind.
Fair. I think that would, I'm not going to say that's not true. I'm just saying I get why they did it this way.
Look, I'm not even talking about...
it doesn't bother me.
I'm not even talking about realism. I don't even care if the real air traffic control people do this. But that said, though, I'm pretty sure that if there's like a real potential chance that something bad's going to happen to a plane, and you know that that's the plane that you're like giving advice to, I feel like that your normal boredom would probably be not there on that particular call. Like, I don't think you'd be feeling bored as you're trying to give advice out to the plane that might not survive.
I fully understand what you're saying. I will point out for that last guy, the guy who actually had to handle things in the most stressful part, he did look very disheveled and he was smoking a cigarette when he did so. I think that is them doing that. In the voice performance, I agree. It's very lackluster and very boring sounding, but that's the job. That is, and I know, not realistic. Oh my God, please, someone shoot this man. I get it. But that's what they were going for.
It's a movie. I don't care.
Look, there is no spoilers here, but during that last sequence, when you think things are about to get the most tense they possibly can, there's literally 2 straight minutes of a solid shot of the cockpit, of them just slowly lowering the plane closer and closer to the ground, with no music, no cutaways, and nobody in the cockpit talking except for the guy in the ATC who's giving them instructions.
Yeah, and it's boring and takes all tension away from the climax of the movie, which is one of the worst parts of the movie.
Yes. But that's just more proof on my side that they were trying to do the realistic. Is it a good choice? No, I'm not saying it is, but that's the explanation.
I didn't ask for an explanation. I'm just trying to tell you what's bad.
That's what I've been giving you for the past 5 minutes.
And I never asked for it, but for some reason you're determined to defend it by explaining it.
You're determined to try to prove me wrong on this.
It's not about proving anyone wrong, it's about saying that my complaints are valid.
Peter, nothing you have ever said has ever been valid to me. I just sit and nod and say, yeah, probably.
This is such a weird sticking point that you've decided to...
I've tried to move on 3 times now, Pete.
You've tried to stand up and defend this, right?
Oh, my God.
Yeah, and I tried to wrap up. I tried to wrap up multiple times as well by just sort of saying yes, but it's not good, and we can move on. And every time I did.
So I hope you guys enjoyed the collector's cut. It's been a real good run.
Why is this the movie that
I don't
you're
know.
fighting me on so much already?
I literally don't. I was just pointing out the fact that people are boring when they're giving professional numbers in a high stakes situation. That's all I'm saying. You want it to be a movie. They want it to be a realistic representation.
And I do not care.
Oh my God.
Realism has never helped a disaster movie.
And that's what they were learning. This is the first one. They didn't know that. They were just like, okay, we're just going to do it like an airplane's going down. How would that happen? Here you go.
Can't wait till David gets his perfect movie. A nice movie, a 2-hour movie about accountants just like passing documents back and forth in the office, just sort of depressed with their lives. Every time they think about coming in the next day, they're just like ready to just jump out the window.
Absolutely.
Hey Trevor, I got those numbers back from head office. They're a few off. Could you fix that, please?
Why am I blanking on his last name? Warhol. Andy Warhol. Empire, 12 hours uninterrupted at the Empire State Building. Mwah. Art.
All right. Okay. Characters or actors or whatever we're on to now.
I'm sure they were all decent stars in the 60s, 70s. I don't recognize any of them.
I mean, I don't really know. Like, I've heard of some names. I know George Kennedy, of course, mainly from the Naked Gun movies, and you should know him as well because he was in Earthquake for one.
Yes.
So-
I recognize some faces as like, oh, I know him from something, but I couldn't have told you it was Earthquake.
Yeah. He is the kind of the head mechanic who goes down and fixes things and whatnot on the airfield. So that's his role. Burt Lancaster, like we said, is Mel Bakersfield. He is the general manager of the airport, making big decisions. Dean Martin is our main pilot character who's on the plane. Notably, he is married to the sister of Burt Lancaster's character, but he is having an affair with one of the air hostesses.
Yes. He also is absolutely not on good terms with Burt Lancaster.
Oh, no.
They are up each other's dicks constantly.
Well, yeah, he's cheating on his sister, and he very much knows that he's cheating on his sister. So
yeah, but like you would think, oh, maybe that would make Vern just like try to grovel a little bit of just like, oh, hey man, are we cool? Nah, he is openly going after him as the general manager and saying how incompetent he is at his job.
Yes, they're very hostile. So that's ongoing. I always like, what's the correct term now? Is it air hostess or stewardess? Because one of them's kind of outdated and seen as kind of offensive, and I don't remember. I can't remember which one's which. I don't want to say the problematic one.
See, now I don't know, and I was about to say the one I was going to say, but now you've got me questioned here.
Because I think one's seen as old-fashioned and kind of sexist, and I actually don't remember which one is. Flight attendant's probably the.
Yeah. So can you still stay stewardess? The term stewardess and flight attendant, they are the same job, but flight attendant is the more proper one now.
Okay. I knew one was seen as a little demeaning, and that's why I'm just checking at this point. So flight attendant, okay, we'll go with that. Although I think they say stewardess in this movie, but it's the 70s, so fair enough.
Yeah, they say a lot of words in some of these 70s movies that you should not be repeating.
I don't think I noticed many in this one.
Not in this one, but I can think of a few 70s movies we've done where it's like, ooh, let's not.
Oh, of course, yeah. So, yes, the flight attendant who is in a relationship with the pilot is Jean Seberg, played by Tanya Livingston. And then we have...
Flip that.
What? Oh, sorry, that way around.
Tanya Livingston, played by Jean Seberg.
Sorry, I read it the wrong way around. Yeah, quite right. Yeah, so the character is... Tanya Livingston. And notably, actually, so two of the actors in this passed away fairly young. One's not as young, but is quite soon after. So the culprit, Guerrero, is played by Van Heflin. He had a heart attack a year after this movie came out and died.
Oh,
so this is his last feature movie released in theaters. But the other one, sadly, is Jean Seberg here, who died about 9 years after this came out, at the age of 40. I think it was ruled a probable suicide was the exact term they used in Paris. Apparently, she'd attempted it multiple times before, after a miscarriage, I think, on the anniversary. Like, or her ex-husband said she'd tried it several times. So, just really sad. As I was looking up some of the actors after we were done watching it, and those like years of death really stuck out as being, oh, that's not that long after this movie, and especially for her, because like she's not that old in this. Like why is she she's what, 32 maybe, based on that year and her age of death.
Yeah, I think so. 41.
No, in the movie, I mean.
Oh, in the movie, yeah. No, that would have been
about that. Yeah. Because when I looked up Burt Lancaster and Dean Martin, they both died somewhere in the mid-90s, but they were born in 1915, so so fair enough.
At a good old Hollywood age.
So so those are kind of are prominent characters. Then there's the old lady who's this was the other thing that was sticking out about how lax airport security was. They can just have stowaways. At one point, where the character says, "This is the fourth one we've had this month," I'm like, what?
Yep.
What?
Which should just tell you that's exactly how it was back then. There is no security. And she even literally describes in one of her opening scenes, like, here's how I get past the very lax security that you do have. And they just go through every single avenue that she takes.
Yes, and they're just kind of amused by it, how ballsy she is. And I'm like, I guarantee you no one at an airport would be remotely amused at any of these attempts
Later on in the movie, they show that there's a person on the plane responsible for doing a final head count, and he comes up with the wrong number. He's one over, and the pilot's just kind of like, hey, we got to get going. And the guy's just like, all right, sure. And immediately, everything in my head is just like, no, Don't do it.
Honestly, that's a moment where I'm like, you know what? Whatever happens is kind of on you. You should not have wanted to take off with the head count being wrong.
That's the weirdest thing, that even if the head count was right, it wouldn't have mattered. Because the stowaway has nothing to do with the fact that there's a bomb.
Yeah, I know. That's true, technically. But that extra person could be dangerous, and he should not have taken off. The fact that another person was the actual culprit is neither here nor there. If anything, the stowaway was fate's way of giving this guy every chance he had to not let this happen.
That was literally God stepping in and said, I gave you a little old lady and you didn't listen.
So, yeah, just also wild. And then there's some sort of like characters that are connected to all these. So you've got Lancaster's wife who's unhappy. You've got the wife of the culprit who kind of factors into things. And you've got a bunch of characters on the plane who, honestly, if anything sticks out as being very different from the rest of disaster movies in general, is just how much very few characters on the plane itself are developed to actually be people you care about. They're basically just extras or minor bit parts, other than the ones that were already introduced.
Yeah, no, entirely. There's this weird thing where they do a bit where I think it's a flight attendant who's making her way down the aisle, and they're doing a first person view, and they focus on the occasional person, and I'm like, oh, that one's going to be important. That's someone who's going to factor into the plot as we move forward. And there's like maybe half of one. Like one person kind of impacts the plot a little bit, but everyone else that they focus on is just, nah, we're just here to add some color to the back area here. There's nothing really going to impact anything.
Well, there is one snooty kid who thinks he's an expert at aviation.
Oh my god, he starts talking and he's just the epitome of a nerd. He's literally, the first words out of his mouth is like, oh, my son here has some questions about this airplane. And he's like, yeah, we're flying at a speed of 5,000. I'm like, shut up, kid. You're going to get pantsed on the way out of this plane.
This is a very old school stereotype or archetype, this kid.
Oh god,
character.
He's so bad.
Yeah, not that it really factors into much, but hey, he's memorable because he's an annoying little shit. So
there is one other character. I'd say the only other one that matters is there's this guy who's just never happy with anything about the plane. Like he's like, oh, I wanted a window seat. They gave me an aisle. These nuts are stale. Da da da. He is constantly a problem for everyone on the plane, and he does factor into the plot somewhat.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Barely. You could easily give it to anyone else, but
one pivotal moment, I suppose. That's pretty much it for important characters. Obviously, there's a lot of bit parts in this because it's just that type of movie.
Yeah, you got a whole subplot where like the people who, like the board of directors for the airport, are going up against Mel because he's not doing enough tiny things to make money, and he's trying to do like a big airport expansion instead. So that's something that just kind of happens in the background for the first hour, and then they've just like, and now there's a plane. We need to deal with that. Yeah,
I wish that was more relevant to something in the main plot. Like, I'm not, like, I kind of get the point of, like, him being, like, forward-thinking and saying, hey, this isn't adequate, we have to do this, this, and this, and it does, like, show his character a little bit. But I think it would have been nice if at some point the conflict with the higher-ups, you know, one of the board directors or whoever it was, it's like played into a decision later on that he'd make where he puts his job on the line to save the plane or something. You know, something that made it kind of tangible and related to everything. Right. Instead, it's just kind of like, hey, we told you not to do this thing. And he's like, we have to do this thing. Have you not seen this plane situation we've got? And he looks at the bit of paper and goes, oh, yeah, actually, yeah, that's quite bad. Yeah, I'll leave you alone.
You won't see me for the rest of the movie. Ta-ta.
Yes, I dare not add conflict to this already tense situation. Bye-bye.
Yeah, that's kind of the biggest problem. As much as I think that the first hour of the movie does a great job of setting up these characters and like giving them a good way to think about each of them, when you do hit that hour mark, anything that's superfluous falls away. Like, we don't get any more development on a bunch of the different plots. They are just immediately like, and we're done with that. Focus on the plane. And it would be something if at the very end they came back to it, which some of the plots they did. Some of the plots they did get a little bit of a wrap up right at the end.
Some not.
So, but that's the thing. Some of them not. And those ones are the ones where it's like, okay, I get it for the sake of character development, but like you should have done something with it.
Yeah. So, yeah, a bunch of characters. As far as like production value and all that goes, because obviously this is a 1970 film at the $10 million budget, which was big at the time. But even at the time, it's not even, because how much of that goes to the cast and whatnot, especially with these big stars. And I'm like, okay, so what do we have here in terms of effects? We have a miniature for the plane. I think where it's most notable is a shot when it's like ascending early on and it's coming up through what's supposed to be the clouds, and I can almost just picture the room where they've got like dry ice or something, like sort of like to
they have
the
a fog machine. You can see it bubbling up from like a specific point, and I'm like, I don't think clouds do that, guys.
And the plane sort of comes through, and I'm like, okay, the miniature works a little. I mean, obviously when it's clear skies and the plane's just kind of like floating at or cruising, I should say, at a set altitude, it's like, okay, this looks fine enough because there's nothing to really point out the flaws. But
yeah, that's the thing, is that because of that earlier shot with the flaws, it makes it very apparent when the plane is just like dangling against a black background with some white dots. I almost would have rather they like try to get like some clouds moving in opposition just to really add the effect of the camera moving, rather than just, it's just hanging here on a thread and we'll just take 2 minutes of shots and cut them up over the course of the movie.
That's a bit another interesting thing to track throughout the sequels, because by the time we get to the next one, like miniatures being used for big movies is more and more of a thing over the course of the 70s. So I wonder if there's improvements even just in this franchise by the time we get to 75, 77,
probably.
So on. So be curious to see if there's more exciting plane stuff happening.
It's going to be a balance of how much is it going to improve versus how much is the budget going to be slashed over the course of the later movies.
Yeah, that's a good point. That said, though, it's not starting off at a huge number. So I'm tempted to look it up and see what the budgets were for all 4 movies now to see what the trajectory is.
Save it. We'll see it.
Yeah. Anyway, so I think at this point we're probably ready to go into spoilers, I think, and start talking about things properly. But is there anything else you want to add before we...
I'm just trying to real quick look through the cast, see if any of the other plots I think are even halfway worth relevancy. The only other...
I know you go.
The only other thing, we kind of halfway mentioned it, is that Vern, Dean Martin's character, is cheating on his wife, but the wife is like aware of it, and she is 100% confident of like, yeah, but like whatever he does, he'll always come back to me because he's afraid of commitment with any of these other girls. So that's the only other thing going on there.
Yeah. Any other boring bit parts you want to defend for some reason?
That nerdy kid, he really did a good job of when he was saying that Leo and Virgo were in the sky, but then later on, as they have to pivot the plane, they then were looking at Sagittarius. Just nailed the astronomy there.
All right, with that said, spoilers, everyone, for Airport. You've been warned.
Yes.
Yes. All right, I mean, where to begin, really? I guess...
I mean, we already gave all the basic character plots, so I think we could probably just skip over like the first half hour, really, barring to say
for the most part,
the inciting incident is that one of the planes, it's a snowstorm, it's totally iced over, and one of the planes manages to miss their turn ever so slightly, gets wedged in a field with their tail stretching over the runway. So one of the 2 runways of this airport is now completely shut down.
Yeah. Which I think, I think people assume airports have tons and tons of runways, but the truth is that I don't think they do. I think they have a couple, and that's why you always have to wait in the plane for the airport, the runway to clear, so that, each plane gets its turn.
Yeah, I think size-wise, you're going to deal with, bigger ones, but they even explicitly say in this thing that they are an old airport and they need an expansion soon because things are getting out of hand.
Yeah, and this is the bigger runway, which is better for the bigger planes, because I also kind of wish this came up a bit more in relevance, but there's like a lot of talk in this about how the runway that they can use right now is the one that is near like some residential areas, and there's a lot of grief about like making too much noise after a certain time, and we get a lot of debating about this, and ultimately like it never really
it 100% factors into and completely ends with the board of directors thinks that Mel's incompetent because he's not willing to do something about it. Anything else beyond that doesn't matter.
I thought, maybe maybe this will be relevant because there's going to be a risk towards the end, but because the plane's coming in from that side, that if something goes wrong, it's going to land in like a bunch of houses and like endanger more people. I thought that's maybe where it was going to go and become relevant, but it never even comes up.
Not at all. I mean, the only thing is that much later on in the movie, when the airplane needs to come down, they're saying, hey, go use the other runway because this one hasn't been cleared yet. And they're like, we can't. If we try to make that kind of turn, we're going to be screwed. And so at that point, we just completely stop the other runway talk and all that ideas of like, oh, maybe it'll impact this residence thing going on, just out the window.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it introduces Oliver Bassett's character as it introduces this problem with this plane, and George Kennedy gets called out to come and try, because he's the lead guy to do this sort of thing. He knows what to dig. He's licensed.
They don't call them emergencies anymore. They call them patrones because he's just the guy.
Yeah, and they call they mention that he is licensed to taxi, which I guess that makes sense that some of these mechanics would be licensed to move the plane around on the tarmac.
Oh yeah, I feel like they would have to. Yeah. Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I've never seen it come up in a movie before. You know, someone who can drive it around but not fly it.
Yeah, well, as we learned in one of those Dirty Harry sequels, you can just take control of the plane whenever you feel like.
Yeah, I suppose we never thought about that was also in the 70s when we watched that movie, whatever one that was.
Maybe Dirty Harry was what really inspired people of like, can he do that? Can they just take over the plane? We need to stop some of these people.
Yeah. That's the thing. Any movie about someone like taking over a plane in like modern day, there has to be like a lot of scenes explaining how they pull it off because it's so hard to do. But yeah, because that's what I was getting at earlier when I was talking about, okay, so the guy's got his suitcase, right, and he's got the explosive in there, and he walks into the airport, and I'm thinking, oh, how's he going to get that past security? What's his plan? And then he just walks onto the plane, and I'm like, oh, never mind. He just walked on. That's all it was.
No problems.
You know, it's a lot more straightforward in that case. Although he does go up to a kiosk and takes out insurance right there in the airport, which,
yes,
you know, is very. I mean, I'm assuming there's still a place you can do that in the airport, but most people, of course, will just do it online now, long before they get to the airport.
Absolutely. There's always something there for the older groups that are trying to fly. They don't know how the internet works.
But in this time period, it would have to be done. I mean, unless you do it by post, I guess. But like this would be like the main way a lot of people get the insurance.
Yeah, which I guess that's the one thing we didn't really describe too much is the culprit Guerrero. He is. I mean, he's having problems.
Yeah, he's the main thing to talk about. Like all of his once he gets introduced, like all of his like backstory and what he's doing is where things really tense up.
So they explain this over the course of a bunch of different scenes, the wife talking about stuff and whatever, but he was in the Army, he was a demolitions expert, he went to a mental hospital at one point.
I mean, but this stuff is revealed much later on. Like, this is when the wife's talking to the airport people.
Yeah, this is after the hour mark, like the plane has already taken off and there's a concern that something's happening aboard.
Yeah, all we know at first is that obviously he's planning to do something. We see the suitcase. And he goes to speak to his wife and lies that he's got a job in a different state and he's getting on the bus and he says, hey, I need some money for a hotel. And she hands over what little she's got, saying that she'll have to just beg like the landlord to like let them away with rent for like another week or something like that. And we don't, so we get there.
He's very apologetic. He's always just like, I know I haven't been good at providing for you. That's all going to change. I'm going to get things better again.
Yeah, so we know that they're hard up financially. And we don't really know what he's doing. But obviously once he goes to the insurance desk and he's like taking out the flight insurance, and she's like, yeah, $5 gets you $150,000 coverage. I'm like, that seems, even for 1970 money, that seems awfully good.
Yeah. That's fantastic odds though. You got to think of it. How often does a plane go down? And how often would they have to pay out to people who wouldn't already all be dead on that plane?
I mean, yeah, I suppose, yeah. But so this is where it clicks though for the audience. But okay, I get what he's doing here. He thinks this is how he's going to provide, because I think they do kind of allude to having kids in the scene where they talk to each other, even though we never see any kids.
I don't remember it there. I remember it later on when the captain is talking to him. He says your family, and I think he says wife and kids.
Yeah, because he says at one point, I know I haven't provided for you and the girls or something like that. I'm sure there was a little line in there that implied
maybe
children.
They're just older, moved out or something like that as well, because they definitely never show any kids.
Oh, yeah, they never show any kids. That's possible. But yeah, they introduce him, they show him doing all this stuff, and he's in the airport, and he's very tense. And there's a character that was introduced a little bit earlier, giving an old lady some grief for what she's trying to smuggle in. She's got like a diamond necklace like hidden inside the dog collar of her dog, and he the customs guy finds it, and he's like, the fine you're going to have to pay now is like 10 times what the duty would have cost. Like, this was such a foolish idea.
Yeah, but if she made it through, she wouldn't have to pay anything.
Well,
so
she took the gamble, and she failed miserably.
She didn't know she was going to run into the friggin' mentalist here, who's able to just look at you and be like, you're guilty, let me find out how.
But he sees the culprit just as he's about to get on the plane, and he catches his eye, and you're like, oh no, he smells something's wrong. And that's when he goes on his little rant about, oh, I wish I could check people's bags before they get on the plane.
If only I had to make them take off their shoes beforehand. I really want to do that.
Yeah, and he's very suspicious, but he says it to the others. He says it to Burt Lancaster and also...
Jean.
No, isn't she the flight attendant?
No. Tanya's the one on the ground.
Oh, what's the flight attendant called?
Flight attendant was Gwen.
Oh, really? Okay. I had those. Do you know what it is? It's because on the photos here, Gwen...
She looks a lot more.
I mean, she's older, of course, but she's got dark hair, and she isn't in the movie, so I never even assumed that was her.
Yeah.
So
now the girlfriend is the flight attendant, Gwen, who's up in the air with Vern.
All right, so Gwen's the one who's pregnant then.
Yes. Sorry, if you said the opposite earlier, I just didn't catch it.
I definitely did. I definitely said Livingston was the one that was pregnant.
My mistake.
I said she was the flight attendant, and you just let it all slip past. David,
well,
what are you doing?
I caught it now, and you didn't know before, so I still am on the moral high ground here.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I said a lot of specific things earlier. All right. Anyway, so yeah, Gwen's the one that's pregnant on the plane then, right? She's got Dean Martin's baby in her. We'll talk about more of that in a bit. But
yes.
But yeah, so the customs guy says it to Tanya and says it to Burt Lancaster's character, and they're like, oh, it could be anything. Do you know how many briefcases go on a plane? It could, could be papers. It could be this, could be that. And he's like, yeah, but I've got a feeling. And of course, I think he says enough that Tanya at least looks at the names on the flight, right?
Yeah, it's a combo between that and it's also the flight that this old woman we mentioned before, she's managed to con her way onto using her little smuggling
We'll talk
trips.
about her whole thing in a minute, but yeah.
Yeah, but because both those things are happening, she's like, all right, we should just run through a whole thing on this plane. And so...
Yeah.
She gets a list of the people who were the last ones to board because she knew he would be one of those. And then simultaneously, the wife, when she gets home from her job, finds a redemption check, a redeeming thing for the fact they overcharged on his ticket. And that clues her in of like, this ticket says to Rome. Why is it going to Rome? He said Milwaukee. So she drives to the airport, just barely missing him as he... ends up leaving, and so she's very despondent and ends up being escorted by Tanya to go deal with that.
Yeah, and when she sees what her name is and recognizes it in the list of passengers, like all these things kind of come together. So no, I think that's where the movie gets really interesting, is when they've basically like predicted that he might be a problem and that he might have something scary, and they have to try and do something about it. Because I think the pilots and the flight attendants, them trying to sort of like suss out if it's him, and if it is him, okay, then what do we do about it? We can't scare him because he might just pull the trigger, whatever it is. Yeah. So like that was where stuff really got tense and started to get really interesting. Like how did they solve this? How do they work around the potential dangers? And that's the fun stuff that's fun to watch them. But we'll get to that in a bit. We'll sort of like set up all the characters and their relevant stuff, because you've got the old lady, of course, who's the stowaway. And the running gag with her, other than the fact that she is just so proud of like all of her stowing.
she is so like, that's the thing, is when they bring her in, they say, oh, we caught a stowaway. And immediately you can tell they're all thinking of like, oh, here's some 16-year-old that ran away from home. Like, here's some kid that's always going to be a problem. And then they bring her in and she's this old lady, and everyone's just like, seriously? What are you doing? And she's just like, oh, I've got kids out in New York and I just can't afford to pay for tickets all the time, so I just get on the flights and no one ever stops me because I've got all these tricks and trades that I've figured out over the years.
Yeah, I have like the little like holder for the ticket, so I just hold that, and then you know the people are. I go to the person who's too busy to actually check, or I'll pretend that my son lost his wallet and he's on the plane, and I'll run on the plane to give him his wallet back. And
I love that.
All of these things, I'm like, yeah, not a single one of these things would fly. No pun intended today.
Absolutely not. I love that the wallet one is the one that actually gets used here, because you see her do it. She's like, oh, my son, he's on the plane. He brought this. And he's like, go on, put it on, get there. And so she just walks on the plane and sits down. But then later on, when the people who work at the airport are like, did you see this old woman? Did she get on this plane? The guy's like, I mean, yes, I saw her, but I'm almost definite that she left because her son had this wallet and she was just returning that. And you just see Tanya's face like, son of a bitch.
She did the wallet
She did
trick.
the exact same thing.
Oh dear. It's funny because like when the pilots are told, hey, you've got a stowaway on board, a woman of this description, see if you can find her, don't engage, but you know, just let us know that she's there.
When they lead off with the description, they even start with like female, about this height, about this weight, and they're like, okay, all right, that seems like a teenager. And then they go 77 years old and they're just like, I'm sorry, what?
Oh dear. So that's her whole setup, and like you said, you know, the wife of the culprit kind of like races to the airport. Basically, not because she suspects that he's going to do something dangerous, but just because she thinks my husband's leaving me, flying to Paris or Rome.
That,
sorry.
and also she does specifically say, and I don't think she was lying, when she's trying to get the information from one of the check-in attendants, she says he's been unwell recently. And we don't know what that means at the moment, but we do find out later on that he was recently discharged from a mental hospital. So
yeah, I think
she's probably concerned about that as well.
Yeah, in the moment, it just reads like, no, he's been having troubles lately. Because she mentions that he keeps losing jobs because he's got a temper and he ends up getting into arguments with these managers or whoever. So in the moment, I think it reads as, oh, he's been unwell, as in he's been having some, you know, temper issues, and he's been down in his luck and whatnot. But yeah, it ends up being this more specific. Oh no, he was in a hospital, and that's when they're like, hey, what? He was in the army. What did he do? And they're like, oh, he was in construction or whatever. And he's like,
Demolitions,
yeah. And he would use explosives when he did that. And she's like, I think so. And they're like, oh no. Like he actually knows what he's doing.
yeah, oh god. And I think even the thing that triggers them was like, yeah, well, he was fired from his last job at the construction site because some dynamite went missing. And they're just like, oh god.
So all of this like sets all this up, and it is kind of a nice sort of snowball effect of once it gets going. There's the other little quirk that I think is kind of useless. For example, when Tanya takes the old woman, or sorry, not the old woman, the wife, right, the wife of the culprit, and she sits her outside of Burt Lancaster's office, and she goes in and says, hey, you know, I've got this woman out here that's the wife of this guy, and she's a bit distraught. She's kind of just wandering around, and she's explaining what's going on. It's like, oh yeah, we'll bring her in, and maybe she'll talk to me. She's not saying anything. And she goes back out, and the wife has disappeared, right?
Yeah.
And there's a whole thing where they have to call into the security, and everyone's like told, and this is where we get this really fancy split screen, where we get like a different security guard in each corner of the screen, and there's like a code word saying, you know, Mr. So-and-so come to the thing, and it's a code for them to mobilize.
Yeah, so they don't have to call over the intercom, all the police gather now.
Yeah. So as not to cause a panic. I was like, okay, that's a nice touch. But what and to be fair, I've worked at places where they've had that for like a fire. You don't say to anyone, like, if you're telling another staff member there's a fire, in case anyone hears you, I mean the place is shut down now, so it's fine. It was Mr. Sands. You say that there's a phone call for Mr. Sands or something like that.
I mean, I worked at a Walmart, and anybody who's been to a Walmart, if you go to the checkout, they are publicly there. Like, they don't try to hide them at all. You can just leaf through it and barely anyone will care. But those were all just code and then colors. It was nowhere near as secretive because almost everyone could just figure it out.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But what I was getting at though is that they basically just find her off camera, and she's brought to the office like 2 scenes later, and like there's nothing of consequence that happens because they couldn't talk to her because it cuts back to the plane anyway, and then when it cuts back, oh, we found her, here she is, talk to her, and I'm like, you could have just cut away from the scene and cut back.
Yeah, I think that segment was specifically to anchor in a little bit more tension, because before she leaves, she doesn't give them anything. Yes. She's just despondent, she's quiet, whatever. And between the part where she's gone And the part where she's found again is when they call down to that insurance agent lady, and she says like, yeah, he was suspicious and weird, and you should probably focus on that. And that then leads the audience to be like, oh, but are they going to find the wife in time? Are they going to be able to get her
Yes,
to
immediately
share more of it? Yeah, but it's just that tiny little, you can't do the entire movie as this big tension arc. Every single disaster movie is, here's a set of problems, and we overcome each one by one while working towards the larger problem.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but it doesn't fix the problem here from like a filmmaking perspective, which is that it happens off camera, so it's not even like you get the sense of like finding her. And what was she even doing? Like she's focused on so little. In fact, after this scene where she tells them everything, she basically disappears until the very end of the movie. So it's not even like it's feeding into like, oh, she was going somewhere because she's going to do something that is going to pay off later. Like, you know, maybe she's distraught, so she's going to try and go do something stupid, or she's going to maybe call her kids or something. Like, I thought, you know, it doesn't have to be a big thing, but it could just be like, oh, she left because she realized I have to call my daughter or something. And
yeah, just at the very least, show her being found by the cops doing whatever it is she's doing.
Yeah, even if it's just as simple as like, calling a kid because she needs to talk to someone about what's happened or whatever. But because it just happens off camera and she's just back magically, it's like that didn't need to happen. Then it feels redundant.
I think that there's a lot of subplots, especially the stuff that doesn't get wrapped up by the end, that feels like that was written that way. This one feels a lot more like a deleted scene because they do specifically show like the police mobilizing and all that stuff. It feels like there was something that was just cut for time here.
Yeah, because they really could have just like cut from when Lancaster says, "Oh, go bring her in." You could cut away back to the plane, and then just cut back to when she's in the office, and you would never know they'd cut out like a subplot there of her being lost and then found.
If you zoom in the camera a little bit to just show like only Lancaster and his desk, you could even keep the insurance agent talk. Like you could keep that exact same conversation going on.
Absolutely. And I think if you could do that, it kind of shows how like just unneeded it is. Just how like...
Again, it feels like it might be one of those things between the novel adaptation where that was a bigger thing. Like that was maybe like 4 chapters of trying to track her down. And in the movie, they were like, well, we got to put it in. But then they, because of like squishing it, it just ended up being 5 minutes.
Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if they were going to cut the whole thing out, but they were so proud of the split screen part of the security guards that they thought, well, we have to keep that bit in.
Yeah. Maybe one of the security guards is like the director's brother. And he's like, I got it. I told him he'd be in the movie. And this is the only part we filmed him for.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just little things like that. Just these little things where you could tighten this movie up. You could cut like 20 minutes out of this movie, just get it under that 2-hour mark by a touch, and I think it would benefit all the more for it by just a bit tightening here or there.
That's fair.
So yeah, there's that, and we kind of alluded to it, but just to sort of quickly actually say what happens in it. So Burt Lancaster and his wife, she's mad that he's always at work. He kind of admits to his co-worker Tanya that, like, yeah, he makes excuses not to go home, and he implies to her that part of the reason is that he likes staying here because of her, but without saying that, you know, super on the nose.
And they specifically even say, like, she's into him, she's come on to him, but he has never led her on. Like, he's always just been like, it can't happen, I have a wife and kids. As much as I'd love for something to happen, I'm going to be upfront with you. And she respects that. She's okay with it. But
and because he's adamant that's the right thing to do until his wife storms into the airport and says, hey, this clearly isn't working. Let's just have a divorce. And he's like, are you sure? It's like, yeah, I won't even be a dick about it. You can come see the kids whenever you want.
Plus, I've been cheating on you for a while now, man. Like, you haven't noticed that?
She's actually like hurt that he's not even noticed or even considered that it could be happening because he's so busy with his work that he's not even noticing she has the time to do that. So
I do like there's one little montage in the middle here. They're talking over the phone, I think, at this point, and it's kind of just a montage of how things are in their relationship, where she wants him to take a job from her father to basically take over the family company or something like that, which will give him more money or whatever. And he's like, nah, babe, I'm an aviation man. I'm going to be here at this airport until the day I die. But you get to see through this montage how not only is it impacting their relationship, like they're constantly just arguing with each other, but it also cuts to their kids and shows their kids are unhappy about it as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about this, to be honest, actually. This was a really weird stylistic choice, is that just as they're having their phone conversation, you just get all these silent clips of their home life playing throughout. It felt a bit weird to me.
I mean, it felt out of place in that they never did anything else like it in the movie, but I think it was a better shorthand than just telling us that these things were happening and just holding on the conversation. I like the fact that they at least gave us some visuals to put it to.
Yeah, but I think a smarter script to me would imply a lot of these things without having to just cut to like some quick like B-roll footage that we got of it like that, because that's what it felt like. It felt like B-roll, and nothing in a movie should feel like B-roll. You know, that's a documentary. That's what you have, you know, like playing over a review. You have clips of the movie perhaps, and that's B-roll.
I mean, if you want to tell me, or if you want me to tell you the one thing that I think you absolutely should have cut out of this, it is when she comes into the airport, she specifically says, "I'm here because our daughter ran away." And they like almost play this as a plot for like a minute and a half. And then she reveals, oh, she's actually at a friend's house, but like, yeah, this isn't good for the kids. Let's get a divorce. And I'm like, you didn't need that part. You could have just had her come in and say, let's get a divorce. Like, you didn't need the extra justification of my kids are upset.
Yeah, there's a lot of little things like that. Like I say, it feels like it's from a time when, to try and make the characters feel more fleshed out, we're going to have these extra little things all connected to what's going on with them. But it actually comes across to me as very messy and like just not tight writing, because a lot of these little things they tack on just don't actually matter or go anywhere. So, and that's not to say that you can't allude to certain things. You can imply so much. You can say certain things. You can imply that, some of the kids like to stay over at their friends purely because they want to get away from us. But the way she set it up was she's ran away and we don't know where she is. Oh no, kidding. I maybe misphrased that a little bit before.
Believe it or not, I just don't like you, and I wanted to see you panic for a second.
Yeah. And you know, even like right after this as well, when like, okay, the divorce is happening, and then Tanya comes in and says, "Oh, I got offered that transfer to San Francisco. I'm going to be leaving unless you want to fight me for me to stay."
I will 100% admit I forgot that was a scene.
Yeah, because it does not matter. It never comes up or goes anywhere.
Totally gone.
Like, obviously you could say, the payoff at the end when he says, "Hey, let's go have breakfast at your place," which is very forward, actually. It's not just, take you out on a date, let's go to your place.
It's not even that forward, right up until he straight up says, like, "I want to taste your scrambled eggs." I'm like, okay, buddy, cool your jets here.
But yeah, like that feels like it just like it almost feels like they're almost doing this just for the actors. Like they're trying to like, hey, your part's really big, you've got all this like backstory, you've got all this stuff that's going on in your life, and then they keep a lot of it in the movie, and I'm like, nah, this is fine for the actors to know all this to help play the character, but I feel like you're keeping a lot of stuff in that is just padding out the movie.
Yeah. Again, I feel like this is just a novel adaptation sort of thing where this was a major plot. This is because if everything is internal, if everything in their heads of like thinking about each other is all just in their heads, that makes for a good book because you are inside of the character's head. You know what they're thinking. You see this love slowly growing better and better over the course of the events of the book. But in the movie, that's all just broken down into the occasional wayward glance and spending scenes together. You don't feel that same level of growth because it isn't able to happen as organically when all the characters have to say their stuff.
Yeah, but that's not an excuse for the problem, though. No. That's then a failure of adaptation, is what you're saying there. It doesn't justify anything, is I guess what I'm saying. So you know, I think there's some. It feels weird to say rough edges because there's such an old school movie that it's more like, they're being so traditional to a fault as opposed to they don't know what they're doing. Like, we have to keep all these things in so the actors can have these scenes where they act, because Burt Lancaster wants to be the good husband who's like trying to remain loyal and the way. But and I'm like I just, this is the sort of thing that's bogging some of this down in the first half, I would say. So yeah, and then, you know, likewise to go over to Dean Martin's character, the pilot, which by the way, his co-pilot, who is kind of like, they're both captains, and the reason why there's two captains and not just like a, I don't know, rookie, but like, you know, like the second pilot's like lower down,
pilot, co-pilot, or whatever.
They're both captains because I don't know how true this is, but it sounds reasonable enough. is that every 6 months or so, you have one pilot supervise another pilot and give them an evaluation just to make sure they're not doing anything, they're not developed any bad habits, they're still, everything's up to code, so on and so on.
Drinks only a reasonable amount of booze on the job, not a overtly large amount.
Of course, yes. That actor, I did recognize, I should have mentioned him earlier. He is from The Shining. He is the guy that gives Jack Nicholson his job in The Shining.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I can't even remember his name in the movie, though, as I'm looking for him here.
He's the other captain. I don't know if... Presumably it would just say Captain so-and-so, but it doesn't.
Yeah, you think so. Oh, I found the nerd, though. What's he been up to?
You found the nerd. Yeah, I think it's Barry Nelson, I want to say, is the actor.
Okay.
Yeah, he's in The Shining, that's him.
There you go. The nerd was Lucius in Planet of the Apes. I don't remember which one Lucius was.
That's one of the apes, I think.
Probably. I just don't remember which one.
Yeah, but I'm not going to feel bad for not recognizing him.
Fair enough.
Because he was playing an ape.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure, I've got a funny feeling he was doing a slightly different voice than he was doing in this movie.
I like to think that is his actual honest-to-God voice, and he has to live with that every day.
So Dean Martin and his girlfriend, and again, obviously his wife, who knows he cheats around, but kind of just expects him to always come home. And his arc for the movie is that by the end, it seems like he's going to ignore his wife and go be with this girl that he's knocked up. But the way it sets it up early on is that they have their private time together. They're getting ready to go to the airport.
Well, that's the thing. They do this weird thing where the wife drops him off at the airport, and then he gets back in a cab to then go to the girlfriend's house.
Yes, just to keep the charade up. But so honestly, the first scene with him and her, I didn't think was so, because honestly, the real scene that really sets up all their stuff is the scene on the plane, because when they're on their own, no one's else on the plane yet, and this is where she reveals she's pregnant, and they have their sort of reactions to that. Like, you could have really just started them as a pair here, rather than need that other scene. Obviously, it is funny that he got a car to take him away after his wife dropped him off. That was a funny detail, but basically, he immediately is like, all right, so an abortion, like that. He's just immediately.
Well, you say that, it's right before he says that, like, he's understanding. He's like, okay, all right, all that. But she comes back with like, look, I know what this means. I know you're married. I know you're not going to be like there for me. I get it. That's how this is. And she's very cool about it. And then he's the one who comes in and is just like, hey, no, like, I'm not just going to leave you out in the cold. I'm going to help you along with this. But I think the best course of action is that I help you get an abortion. Like, that's what I'll be here. I'm not just going to leave you for it, but we're going to take that path in general. Yeah.
And he's like, I hear Sweden's the best place for it. They have good doctors. And I was like, yeah, like, how easy was it to get an abortion in America in 1970? Probably not.
Doubt it. Let me, Roe v. Wade would have been that was 73. So yeah, not easy.
Not easy. So he's like, yeah, I mean, to be fair, he does fly a plane for a living, so I guess it's not that hard to go to Sweden.
I mean, they're just going to Rome right now. Just a hop, skip, and a jump after that.
Yeah. So, but she actually says she's not really, like, morally sure or ethically sure if she wants to go through with that. And he's like, wait, I didn't know you were religious. It's like, nah, it's not a religion thing. It's just, you know. So she
frames it as, there's part of both of us growing inside me. And I just really like that idea.
Yeah, and a lot of those little moments later on with his character where he's like asking like his co-pilot about, like, you've got 7 kids, right?
Please, let's focus on that for a second, because this co-pilot's talking about his marriage, and he's like, yeah, we had a great marriage. I've been loyal to her ever since we met, never fooled around, and we got 7 kids, 4 planned, 3 unplanned. And I'm like, bro, get a condom, for God's sakes.
Hey, 1970 was a very different time, okay?
Okay, so let me get this straight. You're upset because they don't have security at airports the way you think they did, but you accept the fact that condoms may not have been around as much.
Well, I happen to have heard some tales from much older people that contraception, past a certain point, was not that it necessarily didn't exist, but there's a certain generation, like, I'll put it this way, one of my grandmothers had 16 kids because contraception just never entered into the conversation. That
Fair
was
enough.
just the mindset of a lot of people.
Was she super Catholic?
Nope.
All right, then never mind. That's my only extra thing I have on that. Because the Catholics are just like, pop them out as fast as you can. Let's go.
Yes, no. 16 kids. That sounds like a hellscape, quite frankly.
I can't even imagine your family reunions. Dear Lord.
I try to avoid them as best I can. But so I guess what I'm saying is it doesn't surprise me. Is all I'm saying. So
it doesn't surprise me just so much as he's so casual over the fact that 3 were unplanned. Like, you have 7 kids. I could accept that. Fine. You have 7 kids. But the fact that you say, we didn't account for half of them.
The thing that gets me, I mean, it's one thing for him to just blatantly just say that, which is a little bit weird. But the thing that gets me, though, is then Dean Martin says, so, hey, like, those 3 were unplanned. Like, you know, were you, like, scared? Or, like, did you second guess them or whatever, right?
You ever consider going to Sweden?
And he's like, I mean, they were a surprise. I love all my 7 kids equally, but to be honest, those unplanned ones ended up being extra special. And I'm like, what does that mean? You said you loved them equally, but you just said the unplanned ones ended up being nicer or better. I don't understand.
Those ones actually have to earn their love. Everyone else gets it for free. Those ones, they got to really step up.
And of course, this is a little moment that makes Dean Martin go, oh, really? That's interesting. It's obviously making us think, oh, maybe we should keep the baby. Maybe I'm disregarding this too soon.
Yeah, maybe I don't actually love my wife that much. Let's find out where this one goes.
Yeah, because that comes up sort of relative early on as well, where she says, oh, I know you don't love me. And he's like, no, I do. Actually, I do love you a little. And then, like, by the end, he's like, no, I lied earlier on. It's actually a lot. I love you a lot. And then, of course, you know, that leads to the ending, which we'll get to. So that sets the stage for most of the characters that are going to be important.
Yeah.
So
pretty much.
You know.
Trying to think if there's literally anything else. Not really. Everything else is cut in and out in between.
Yeah, because, I mean, once we're in the air, I mean, the important characters are Dean Martin's character, and then Gwen, the flight attendant. Like, those are the 2 that are really dry. And the old lady, I guess, but, like...
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even then, she stops at a certain point. She does her thing, and then she's like, all right, we're done now.
Because it's important to mention that she takes the seat that is right next to the culprit with his suitcase. That is a very important plot point that is going to factor in heavily to all the proceedings that come up.
You know, I'm going to go ahead and say that that's probably part of her con as well, is that nobody would ever think that a person who doesn't have a ticket would purposely choose a middle seat. Like, that's craziness.
Yeah, that's just ignore the fact that it was the only one that was free.
There were a few. They showed farther up this plane, there were a couple. The one thing that I thought was always going to come back, and you mentioned a while back, is there are 2 captains. There are 2 people capable of flying this plane. And maybe it's just because I'm kind of letting Airplane influence what I was expecting from this movie, but I expected there to be a problem with one of the pilots where he was not able to fly the plane. So it was just kind of brought down to this, probably Vern. It would be the one that I would expect would be the one that has to land this plane. But by the time we hit the end, it's both of them perfectly fine, perfectly capable of doing their jobs.
Yeah, you thought the other guy was going to be making an early trip to the Overlook Hotel. Yeah.
That, or at the very least, they made a joke early on of him needing fainting spells. That's why he puts on an oxygen mask. And then they very quickly explain, like, no, that's FAA regulations. Like, anytime there's just one pilot in there, he's got to put on that oxygen mask. And I was like, okay, but why not let him faint? That adds tension. Let them be a thing. Like, I want that to happen.
I mean, that's probably the biggest critique of the back half, is that there's very little tension when they're landing the plane. Because it just kind of goes really smoothly, and there's not a whole lot, like, making it more... Like, if this was made a bit later, regardless of anything else that would have changed, I think that tail section would have absolutely broke off in a modern movie.
Oh, absolutely.
To make it more exciting.
Absolutely. That need to come down over some bit of the town, and what they also would need to do is, there's a whole bit of, we got to get this stuck plane off of the runway, we got to get its tail out of the way, and then we cut over to the plane making its final descent, where it's already been cleared. Those would be intercut. Yeah. Those would absolutely be like, we're getting it out of here at the last possible second.
That is true. Just intercutting those rather than having them succeed with moving the plane out the way and then cutting to the start of the landing process, that would just make such a big difference in creating a little bit of tension.
Yep. Because you could even interrupt that 2-minute uninterrupted shot of the cockpit, and that's when it all happens, and then everything else would be the same.
Yeah. And it would really add some more tension to the, like, George Kennedy and the seat try to get it moving. If we think, oh, he's going to get hit with this plane if he doesn't move it in the next 30 seconds, and you have a countdown timer, basically.
He doesn't kill the engines in time, and the plows have to leave the runway because otherwise they're not going to be able to get off in time for the plane to make it out.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So yeah, just a bit of editing with that before you even change anything else, just editing that differently might have really shook things up. But the tension though is pretty good here once we're on the plane, because we have this idea of like, okay, they tell the pilots there's a suspected passenger who might have something like this on the plane. You have to do something, like just establish if he's there and whatever. So
does he look nervous, and does he have this briefcase that the bomb is most likely in? So
sure enough, when the flight attendant comes in, because she already went to check if the stowaway was there and she found her, and because she's sitting right next to this guy, she's like, no, that guy's definitely there because he's sitting next to the stowaway. I saw him when I was seeing her, and he does look pretty nervous, and he was being weird about his case where he didn't want to let go of it. He wanted to eat his dinner or whatever it was on top of it. All these little details that are like, yeah, and now you're telling me he could be dangerous. This actually is all adding up. So I love that it's like, okay, so Dean Martin's just gonna, I'm gonna do one of my just like casual, like walking, like, hello and say hi to everyone just to get a look at him, right? But without arousing suspicion, because if we make him suspicious, then he might do something bad. So
I think he's also trying to see, one thing he's specifically looking for is, can he spot the detonation device on the outside of the briefcase?
Yeah, and because he also says, he's asking like, oh, where's he sitting? Like, how many people are sitting next to him? And he's like, oh, there's 2 people. I can't jump over 2 people in time. Like, he'll get to like the the button or whatever. He's
gonna be able to pull it.
So it's like, okay, so he does a little walk. He sees where he is, and he's like, comes back. I was like, I can't do that again. It'll be too suspicious. So I'm sorry to Gwen here, but Gwen, you're going to have to be the one who goes up and like does stuff. And it turns out they don't tell us this in advance, but they've got a little plan here where, because the stowaway's sitting next to him, they have Gwen go up, and even though previously they'd said, oh, don't bother her, they'll just get her in Italy, there's no point in making her miserable and causing a ruckus and scaring people, we'll just not mention it until we land. Instead, they're like, okay, now we can use that. Gwen can go up and ask for her ticket. And the old lady's like, trying to make excuses, try to like change the conversation, and Gwen's like, no, ma'am, I need your ticket.
I love how she is just like, oh, you're English, aren't you? Oh, you speak so beautifully. My late husband. And she's just like, I don't care about your late husband. Give me your ticket.
And then she eventually uses the old lady's name, and she's like, well, if you know my name, then we both know you know, so why pretend otherwise? So she just grabs her by the arm and is like, come out here, you're coming up to me, the captain wants to see you.
All the other passengers are like, hey, that's an old lady, how dare you treat her like that? She doesn't need to be roughed up that way.
Yeah, you're being a bit mean. And again, this is the sort of thing where modern day, if people like found out someone on the plane wasn't meant to be there, they would not be sticking up for them no matter who it was. They'd be like, yeah, deal with whoever this is. Like,
I mean, you say that, but I guess it would be the context of it, because I've seen multiple things from like airlines that are like treating passengers badly. And even if the airline is justified in the end, a lot of people react from just the visual of that for the passenger.
Fair enough. Again, admittedly, if it's a tiny old lady, sure. But I feel like if it's like even a lady who's like 10 years younger and just a bit more spry looking.
Well, if she's getting up from the plane saying like, take me to your manager, I'd be like, yeah, all right, take her. Get out of there.
Yeah. So she takes it up to the cockpit, and then the captain's like, look, you're back here for a different reason than what was just said to you. And if
you've been inscripted.
And if you help us with what we need help with, you'll fly first class for the rest of your life. No questions asked.
I love the bit where Gwen, like, breaking the act is like, I hope I didn't hurt you. And she's like, oh, no. And then it clicks in her head. She's like, well, not much. Like, she's like, if this doesn't work out, I'm still going to get something out of it.
Yeah. And it's like, you don't get scared easily, do you? So we don't get to hear the rest of it, but obviously they tell her what the situation is. They tell her what she needs to do. And it's basically just to create, like, a little scene when...
Yeah, just a scene. And being able to... So they slam her back in her seat, and she's crying, screaming, like, don't take me to the police, please, I beg of you. And Gwen's just standing by, just like, oh, well, you should have thought about that beforehand. And all of the other passengers are like kind of on her side, not Gwen's, the old ladies.
Yeah.
Until she gets crazy and hysteric enough that she reaches over to the culprit.
Oh, yeah,
grabs
hold on.
Uh-huh.
Dean Martin's there by this point as well. Like, he sort of came to speak to her or whatever.
No, at this point, he's like peeking through the curtain. He's just seeing this happening.
But what
he's
I mean
not
is,
there yet.
but he's there to, like, jump and grab the case.
Yeah, he's ready
right?
to go. Well, no, the order of it is that the old lady grabs the culprit, and once that happens, Gwen grabs the case.
Yeah, because his hands go up when the old lady grabs him. He picks up his hands to try and get rid of her, and that's when she jumps for the case and grabs it and tries to get away from him.
And then cue the worst dude on this flight.
This is the like where you just villainize this guy forever, because this one random passenger, this asshole
who's been a dick the entire time.
He's had a couple of scenes where he's complained about very stupid things. He stands up and says, "You can't take that from him. That's his private property," and grabs it out of Gwen's hand and hands it back to the culprit.
Yeah.
And
who then runs to the back of the plane as everyone scrambles.
Yeah. And then that's when Dean Martin sort of like, fights through the line a little bit, and it has to sort of stand there and try and what I love about this is obviously there's a point in this conversation where he eventually says there's no need to set off that bomb, and he uses that word, and that's when all the other passengers go, whoa, what? Right?
Yeah, and he's like, shut up, sit down, I'm dealing with it.
But what I like about it, though, is that even before that point, they're all kind of tense and, like, waiting to see because clearly, like, I think at this point, because the captain's, like, talking to him in this way, they realize that there's something going on here. It's like, even if they don't say it, you can tell that they're all kind of aware, okay, something's serious here, and we don't know what it is, we don't know what's going on, but something's playing out here. And if anything, I almost wish that there's maybe a follow-up to like the asshole who grabbed the case and gave him it back. Like, I almost wish later on there's a little scene where someone says, "Hey, douchebag."
I mean, kind of. They kind of had that sequence, because as everything's falling apart, we'll get to it, but as everything's falling apart, like, he's in the brace position for the crash, and he just starts going off just like, oh, we're all gonna die, and a priest who's sitting across the aisle does the cross and then slaps him across the face, and I'm like, there it is. That's the payback.
So one thing we didn't mention is that before we got this scene, actually, there was a scene on the ground where they have George Kennedy with like a model of the plane talking about what will happen if this goes off, which I did think there was like a weird thing about this scene, actually, which is they said, okay, what will happen if it goes off? And all I could think was, you have no idea what the actual explosive is or how much of it there is. How could you possibly predict how much?
They did know that a few sticks of dynamite went missing from the wife. So maybe they were assuming that's his payload, that's as much as he's got.
Okay, that's something. Okay, that is something. But I mean, an explosive could be any size depending on, what it is.
Maybe he's taken dynamite from the past 7 jobs he's done. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? But
the other thing is that I like
to talk more about the scene. There's more to this, because they're talking about what will happen if it goes off where he's sitting, and they say, okay, well, first of all, it'll probably blow a hole in the side of the plane, and anyone within about 20 feet will get sucked out of it. The pressure is going to change rapidly. It's going to get cold. They're all going to need oxygen, but it could still fly. It might not disable the plane from being able to fly. So I think what's so important about that is that it sets up this context for what happens if it goes off there. It sets up a expectation of the size of the explosion. The whole plane's not just going to go boom. It's a very specific small thing. But because that was all given to us really clearly for sitting at the window, when the guy gets up and he's like standing at the back of the plane holding the case, you're like, oh, okay, all of a sudden he's now in a very different position. It's not, I mean, it's only like maybe 10 feet, but it's still strategically in terms of the plane, it's a different location. And then, of course, he gets, this is the other passenger that's got some explaining to do. Admittedly, this was accidental, but right behind him is the toilet. And right after this tense moment where the guy is actually the culprit, looks like he's ready to maybe hand over the case. He's thinking about it, because Dean Martin has made a really good case against him where he's like, hey, on the ground, they know what you've done. Your insurance is invalid. that money's not going to anyone. You won't achieve anything here. And, you know, talk some sense into him. The culprit's getting ready to hand it over. And then just as he's about to do it, some guy who just had a big shit comes out of the toilet behind him, and it freaks him out, and he just sort of like scrambles into the toilet.
No, because that could have still been recovered. Guy comes out of toilet. Yes, he is scared for a moment. But then douchebag Kai is the one who chimes up and says, "Get him, he's got a bomb."
Okay,
and
true.
That's what settles it off. Screw that guy.
I had forgotten that line had been yelled out. Admittedly, that probably did not help the situation.
No, it did not. Especially because that guy then probably did lunge after. I didn't have the scene exactly. But yeah, no, absolutely. I'm more shocked that like all of that screaming happened. Everything went dead silent. And that dude inside the bathroom's like, I wonder what's happening out there. Like, you would think he would just have some level of awareness, but no, he just pops out like, guys, light a match.
Yeah, poor Gwen runs up to try and open the bathroom door.
Oh, well, hold on. One other thing. It's barely important to the plot, but prior to all of this happening, they did already have a plan in place, which was they were going to they already started turning the plane around.
Sure, yeah.
And they were going to land back at another airport. So that was already the plan. But then these guys up in the plane decide, like, but we can't just rely on getting there fast enough because some of the passengers might notice when we start descending, and if he figures that out, he might set it off prematurely.
Yeah, another detail there is that they go like a really wide turn to try and make it so that the passengers don't feel the plane turning. So it's going to be a really gradual long turn. And of course, the only person who notices is the nerdy kid who thinks he's obsessed with aviation.
And I loved how it's handled.
Yeah, so it's when the captain's doing his like smelling and walking, when Dean Martin's like going up to check, just case everyone out to get a look at the guy, and he goes past this family with the kid, and he's like, "Excuse me, Captain, I believe we are turning an angle here. Could you explain what's going on?" And the captain's like, "Oh, you've got quite a little aviator here," and then he just throws out
for little shit. Yeah, absolutely.
And he throws out like 30 seconds of just really thick airplane jargon at him. Right?
Yeah. Hold on. I got it here.
Oh, there you go.
Due to a set slow wind, Dice Stars vectored us into a 360 turn for some slow traffic. Now we'll maintain this board and hold until we receive a Forta Magnus clearance from Melnix. And the kid's just like, oh, yeah, of course. That makes sense. And the look that Vern gives as the kid accepts that, I just imagine him like waiting for the kid to turn around and then just flipping double birds because he's like, screw you, kid. Trying to catch me out on that.
And then the dad's like, hey, son, what did he mean by that? It's like, I'll tell you later, Dad.
Yeah, as soon as I get to my encyclopedias.
I think, Joe, the weird thing is what he said made sense to me. Basically, what he said, I think, is that, because we have to stall, we're circling for a bit. That was basically what he said.
As soon as he said the 360 turn, he's like, we're moving into a slower traffic pattern, and we're just going to like do that for a little bit. No problem.
Yeah, basically what the planes were doing in Die Hard 2 because they couldn't land. That's basically what was happening.
Except for somehow he justifies it as we're almost over the Atlantic, but we're doing it again anyway.
Yes, even though there's a lot more space up here once you're near the ocean. But yeah, that's fair. No, so again, go back to the culprits went into the bathroom, right? And of course, it's not that long before he sets it off. But what I like about that earlier scene with the model is that you're thinking, okay, we understand the type of explosion it's going to be. And now at this point, it's just because he's kind of trapped. He doesn't have really many options. He doesn't want caught. He sets it off and he goes like sucked out the side of the plane. But it's like, okay, it's in a slightly different part of the plane. But we know that there's a bit of a radius for it affecting other people. And the only one who's really close to him at this point is Gwen, who's trying to open the door. And obviously when the blast goes off, she goes flying with the door into the other side and gets knocked out, basically.
Yeah.
Detail I liked here, though, is that because like all the passengers are kind of still in their seats, more or less, but obviously Dean Martin isn't, he starts like sort of getting sucked down the aisle, and one of the passengers like grabs him and holds on to him so that he doesn't die.
It's pulling all the passengers into their seats, but he's the one who's going down the aisle.
Yeah.
And that's, what I liked about that sequence with the showing the airplane model is that they specifically are listing off the things that would be a problem if they got impacted. They were like, there's some wiring in this specific area, and then there's some other stuff here. That will be a problem if it got hit. But luckily, it's not where that stuff is. So that way, as soon as it happens somewhere else, your mind is immediately thinking, what about that wiring?
Yeah.
Is that impacted? And like you know the problems that could be caused by this just because it moved a few feet back.
And they probably mitigated it a little bit because they'd already started descending, not to land, but they made a point of saying that at the 33,000 feet or whatever they were at for cruising, like, oh, the pressure up here, the change would be devastating. But they'd already started, like, so they weren't quite at a safe, like, altitude yet, but because they were already mid-descent, and then they kind of speed it up a little bit once this happens, it levels out a bit maybe quicker than it would have otherwise because they were already, like, on their way down.
But then they also do specifically show, like, okay, the airbags drop, everyone starts inhaling because you can see them getting affected by the low pressurization. So they even have one shot. I thought it was a very brutal shot of one guy who just isn't doing it. He's turned around like backwards in his chair and he's not getting his mask on.
He's blue.
And yeah, he is full on blue. He is like absolutely about to die.
Yeah, because they make it clear you cannot breathe at that height. You just can't, that altitude. So it's like, but so I don't know if they ever actually mentioned what altitude they go down to, so it's breathable. But I'll just maybe they're being vague intentionally. But
I think they said like they kept on bringing up like a 10,010 for height. I have to assume that's either 10,000 feet or 1,000 feet. 1,000 seems too low, so I'm going to go with 10,000.
Yeah, because 1,000 feet, isn't there some buildings that would be taller
Probably.
than that? yeah. 10,000. I mean, 10,000 still sounds really high though. But I don't know, like at what point it's too high up to breathe. Like,
how high is there breathable air? You can still breathe the air at 20,000 feet. Most people can live 10,000 to 12,000. So it's not great, but once you're down to 10,000, you can still manage.
I mean, yeah, okay, fair enough. So that's about right then, 10,000.
And it's also a thing where they go back, they have like blankets, stuff like that, and somehow they manage to seal up this hole in the wall. Like they managed to stop it from just constantly being this wind in and out. It's not like an air seal where they can build back up pressurization, but it stops like actively sucking things out where they can get the oxygen levels back normal again.
Yeah, it's not sealed. It's just like covered to stop any kind of extreme movement. But it's still cold though, because obviously it's still leaking temperature. So they've got all the heating on, they've got blankets. They're kind of keeping everyone as best they can. That's
one thing the douchey passenger kept on doing was he kept on saying how the airplane was too hot and too cold and all that. It's just like, oh, is this hot enough for you now, buddy?
Yeah. So, and then the thing is when they're checking out the damage, like they notice, I think they send like the third in command to get to the back of the plane, and he sees like this crack on the ceiling right near where the bomb went off, and it's like, oh, that looks very unsafe. Oh, is that tail section going to pop off? And that's why earlier on we said, oh, in a more modern movie, that absolutely would have happened on the landing, just to add some excitement and tension.
Yeah, for this, it's basically just used as the justification for why they can't get onto the other runway. Because if they take the other runway, it's going to like put too much horizontal pressure and break off that tail bit. Yeah,
plus it'd be falling into like residential areas, so you're just putting more people at risk. So it kind of, every so often they cut back to it, because especially since it's right next to where what's her face, Gwen is injured. And they actually just say casually, there's 3 doctors on board, and I'm like, 3 and what? That's a really useful flight.
Dude, there are 3 doctors on board. There's a priest. There's 2 nuns. There are multiple members of the military. This is the most useful flight that's ever boarded.
I actually think the reason for that, in terms of a movie, is just so that visually it's easy to remember a variety of people, because you see a military uniform, you see a nun, you see a priest, you see all these distinctive visual people. You see a nerdy kid with the big thick glasses. Like they're all very like easy to recognize at a glance.
But again, like the moment that it starts cutting amongst them, all I'm picturing is airplane, where I'm like, yep, that's the old lady that can speak jive.
But that's why Airplane did it, is they were making fun of this variety of passengers. That's why there's nuns in that movie.
Absolutely.
So, honestly, this is the thing, is once it gets to this point, obviously they're trying to clear the runway down the ground.
Yeah, this is where it focuses back down on the ground, because basically because of snow and stuff, they can't land at any other airports. They got to go all the way back to their home one, which has a chance at the very least. But they haven't yet cleared off the runway. So it's kind of a race against time back on the ground of, we get one last shot at this, and then we'll have to bring in plows, which will end up destroying the plane, costing us $8 million.
Yeah, and other than that, it's basically just, oh, like, Gwen's in a bad state. We need to have like a surgeon ready for her down on the ground. That's pretty much it. This is where Dean Martin kind of admits to the doctor who comes to tell him that, oh, by the way, she's pregnant. Does that affect anything? And he's like, no, if she lives, nothing should have affected the baby. But, you know, it's good to know that.
her big thing that happened to her is that she's got some sort of splinters in her eye. So they need to take that to a eye doctor when they land.
But yeah, my biggest complaint of the movie, really, as much as I've complained about some of the setup and the fluffy extra character stuff that just doesn't really matter, is just how lacking in tension the actual landing is. Because it feels like it should be the big, you know, because normally in a plane movie like this, the landing of the plane's a big thing at the end. Because it's a big, like, you know, this is the final bit of tension. And here it just kind of feels like, oh, they just quietly descend and there's never like an issue like along the way. It's just kind of, yep.
I think that might be, yes, there isn't that much of an issue along the way, but I think that the very end bit is just a lack of telling the audience specifically what's happening, because they run out of runway. Like, they go down this runway and they have to like skid out to the right, but they use all this, not jargon, but like harder to understand stuff of they need help with the rudders. They're saying that the rudders are slow, and like they both have to jam down hard with their feet. Like, both pilots have to do this in order to make this turn right at the very end. I think that was meant to be something where we as the audience understand that they're going to have trouble braking, but it was never relayed powerfully enough to actually understand it, at least for me.
Yeah, a close-up of maybe their feet slamming on the pedals, perhaps, maybe them looking a bit more sweaty and scared, and not like airplane comedy sweaty, but like, you know, a bit more, because it feels like they're very cool, all things considered. And I get that, again, in a real world context, you want your pilots to be as cool as possible to handle situations, but I still believe they'd start to feel the tension of like, oh, this is a actual life and death moment we're living through here, you know. Let's see that on their faces a little bit.
And again, just pacing wise, intercutting that or just tightening up around the moving the plane, because it didn't feel, they literally said there's a good like 10 to 15 minutes between when the plane moves out of the runway to when the damaged plane lands. So it doesn't feel like there's this race against the clock as much as there should be.
And of course, like, that means we see all of the plane being moved before the descent of the plane that's coming in starts. Like, you know, it just doesn't make for that much tension. And then really all that's left once they land and everything's kind of, you know, going down is just kind of wrapping up some various little character beats and stuff. One being, of course, that Dean Martin doesn't even see that his wife's there because she was scared that something happened to him. He just walks past her holding the hand of his girlfriend.
Well, the doctor that was treating Gwen on the plane comes out and stands in front of her, not knowing who she is, saying, oh, we have a stewardess up there. She's going to need surgery. If you've got some anesthetic, just remember she's pregnant. And you see her face like, I'm sorry, what? Huh? And then as they exit, we see that he's with her and she's like about to reach out, but he's like, I'm going to the hospital with her. And she's like, well, that's my marriage done. All right.
Yeah, this is a much more like sad, one-sided split versus the other marriage that ended earlier on in the movie.
Yeah, and then the other thing that happens here in the actual exit area is that the wife of the culprit comes around and it's just like sobbing to everyone, like, he didn't mean it. I'm so sorry. Oh God.
What does that even like mean in this context? He didn't mean it.
He didn't mean it.
He did mean it. He planned it and he did it.
It's the equivalent of like a kid punching another kid on the playground. It's like, he didn't mean it. He just doesn't know any better.
I mean, if he had gotten his way, he would have done it over the Atlantic and they'd all be dead. Like that is basically like what would have happened. So yeah, I don't know. It just feels like,
I mean, based off what they're saying, it sounds like they might have actually been fine, because the way they were describing that scene, yes, he would have died. Yes, the old lady would have died. A couple other people would have been sucked out. But ultimately, the plane could still turn around and land in that condition.
Well, no, because you're forgetting that they wouldn't have known in advance, so they wouldn't have been descending already. So it might have caused a lot more problems with the breathing.
That's true. Yeah, that might have caused a problem. I think in so much as, you know, maybe the entire crew may have, or not crew, the tour section may have died, but I think the crew would have been immediately reactive, got the masks on, and would have been fine.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing that helps them is the fact that they predict the things coming and
Yeah.
that's what's able to let them dodge a lot of the problems that are going to come up.
Yeah,
But
I'd say so.
yeah, like so you got that. I mean, the main ending for Burt Lancaster and
Yeah, the post credit is not even post credit. Like the very last thing before credit is
post credit. Like, it's 1970, David. They didn't do post credit scenes.
So Nick Fury comes into the hangar. No, so they've got the airplane taxied into a warehouse. They're doing some measurements on the hull. This is where we get the remind me to send a thank you letter to Mr. Boeing, which dates well. And then as Burt Lancaster and Tanya are going to leave, having almost started becoming a couple, someone comes up and says, Mr. Lancaster, we need you to take a look at these machines. And he says, figure it out yourself, as he goes off with the new woman instead of his wife, who wanted just literally the exact same thing.
Obviously, the arc is that he's realizing he doesn't want to make the same mistakes again. He has to give time to his private life and to whoever he wants to be with, and that's the choice he makes at the end. That's fine enough, but
I get that he wasn't happy with his wife, because they explicitly have a conversation earlier on saying it's not just about this. It's about like all the stuff with the father and that job too. It's not just about me working at the airport that's bothering us. But the fact that he is willing to make these changes with the new girl before any sort of divorce paperwork has even been printed is like, maybe try that one again with your new mindset, guy.
Yeah, and then that's pretty much it. I mean, George Kennedy's character basically bet he could move the plane by just like, going full blast, and he bet Lancaster a box of cigars that he could do it, and he got his box of cigars. That's that plot tied up. That's pretty much
But he's so confident in that, like, as they're like, an hour before the end of the movie, as they're still discussing whether or not they can move it, he's like, yeah, why are you standing here? Go get my cigars. It's going to be done.
Yeah, and one of the little side things that's also wrapped up here is that the customs guy mentioned that his niece was on that plane, so you do see him reunite with her when she gets off. I don't know if I realized that was his niece though before. I knew his niece was on the plane, and I noticed this character kinda on the plane.
They had a weird little thing where they specifically said she was part of a foreign exchange thing.
Yes,
and then at the end, you see that this is one and the same character, but nothing during the very few scenes where she is hints that that's the same as the niece as him.
Yeah. They explain she's swapping with an Italian girl who's going to come and live with her family, which, fair enough.
I have to wonder how many of these people, obviously the old lady we see has been first class for life now, so she just hops back on a plane, but I have to wonder how many of these people did not ever come back to an airport.
Oh, sure. Again. I mean, the old lady is basically saying at the end, oh, this isn't as exciting as when I used to con my way onto the plane.
Yeah. She always only did it for the thrills. She didn't care.
Yeah, because there's a whole bit of her earlier stuff where she was being escorted around with like the young guy who was like charged with like basically just looking after her until it was time to get her on her plane back to where she came from. And she basically like fakes an illness and ditches him to get to the bathroom and then like, gets away. So he gets some shit for that, but that was just basically all of the like her on her journey to eventually getting onto this plane to Rome. And actually, at one point she reveals to I think it's one of the pilots. She's talking about why she's on this plane because they're like, "Wait, you want to get to New York? Why did you come on this plane?" And she's like, "Because when they catch me in Rome, they'll want to send me back as quickly as possible, and the first flight back to the US is New York." And I'm like, "You're operating on like multiple levels here, old lady."
I was gonna say, like, as she started to say that, I was thinking, oh, this is just another con. It's another lie of like, oh, I always have a reason why I would have done this. But she lists off like the specific flight number that is the next one to go out of Rome, and I'm like, oh, you mean it? Like, you have a backup plan here. That's insane to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's just assuming that they want to send her back as quickly as possible. There's always a chance they'd be like, no, you're going to Italian jail for a while.
They don't treat old ladies well over there.
You're going to be in the pasta mines.
You're going to be sauce drilling out in the rigs.
And if you don't, you'll be spaghetti.
Oh, God. That's what it's made of.
Old ladies. Old stowaways.
Yep. Anytime there's a stowaway, The spaghetti harvest will be good.
Yeah, because I actually googled it when this plot started. I was like, wait, are stowaways still a thing? And not in this context, because you can't sneak your way onto a plane like this. Right? A stowaway now in a plane typically is someone who tries to sneak up where the wheels come down from, and most of them die because they're outside the plane.
Because when they had that bit at the beginning saying, well, outside it's a cool -50 degrees and everyone chuckles, that's what they're dealing with.
Yeah, because even I've noticed that in a plane where, like, these days, if you're looking at the map screen on the little thing, if you're not watching a movie, it'll tell you what the temperature is outside the plane right now. And it's like silly cold. It's like, no, that would be instant freezing to death.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh dear. Anyway, that's Airport.
That's a movie.
It's indeed a movie film. Very fascinated to see how the sequels shake things up, given that they're coming out after the bigger disaster movies that followed and ended up being more famous.
I fully imagine that we're going to get a third of the setup before we introduce the big thing that's happening. I think that that's going to be the first thing that goes. Even if there's just as much setup, I suspect the threat setup will be at least sprinkled throughout. You know, we'll have like an idea of what the threat is much earlier. But that's fair.
Yeah. So, yeah, cool. Plus, George Kennedy apparently is in some of the sequels, so it may be the same airport.
That, or he's just getting transferred around, a la John McClane.
True.
Just.
Well, I suppose it depends if he's playing the same character or not. I guess I should.
I would assume so. I don't see any reason why you would bring it back and then change his character.
It feels like the sort of franchise, though, where you could basically just treat it as an anthology. All that really matters is that you're doing a plane thing. Like, everything else is irrelevant. Airport 77. Right. Oh, Petroni? Yep.
And Airport 79, Captain Joe Petroni.
What? So he's in all four. Is he the only character who's going to be in all four movies?
Seems it. I mean, we'll see if there is any other carryover, but he's the one that's the only one so far.
That is wild. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff.
So this season is not airport season. It's George Kennedy 70s season.
I'm sure there's some sort of weird joke I can make because there's a president named Kennedy, but I can't think of it.
The other Kennedy season. The other Kennedy season.
The important Kennedy from the 70s. No way, that doesn't work either. Nah, because that was the 60s. Never mind.
I mean, there was still the Kennedy family. There was still other Kennedys going on.
But the main one everyone thinks about was assassinated in the early 60s.
Yeah, true.
What can I say?
All right, want to wrap this up?
Yeah, all right. What was your scene of the movie?
My scene of the movie, I think it's going to come down between plots, and then I'll narrow it down from there. I think that it is going to be the sequence where they are on the airplane. I think that's got the best sequences in the second half there. And then within that, I'm going to give it to the immediate lead up and then immediate fallout of the bomb exploding. Like that whole section there of the old woman's escorted back and we see the plan being put in action, and then all the way up to the oxygen masks are coming down and everyone's just trying to deal with it. I think that is where it looks like the highest budget, if I'm being honest with you. I'm sure there are other things that cost more, but that seems like the biggest set piece that actually mattered to me. And then it just is the turning point of like, okay, this is the disaster. If we're talking in terms of disaster movies, this is it. It has happened. How do we deal with the fallout from here on? And they just do whatever they can.
Yeah, I think pretty similar. I'd specifically say it's like the plan to with the old lady and maybe the like Dean Martin trying to negotiate with them after. I think that entire section is where I'm the most riveted by the movie, because I think that's where it's like, oh, this is a cool concept. This is where you're really sort of like playing with what you've set up, and it felt like big things were happening. So that's what I'm going with. So MVP of the movie, and this is the sort of movie where you've got a lot of choice, kind of.
Yeah, you got a full ensemble here. I think obvious choices for me is Vern, the captain, because he's just got a lot of choices to make. He's a very solid character throughout and throughout. I think the old lady, she's got the most fun with her. She's absolutely one that is fun to be around throughout the movie. She does kind of fall out in the very tail section of this, but for the most part, she's good throughout. And then George Kennedy is the only one that I think could earn it down on the ground. He's just fun enough as a character to be interesting, but he does not get a lot of time to explore that. And I'm thinking he's probably going to get more chances in later installments. So I'm just going to cut him out from the contention here because he's still got later chances. So I think what it's probably going to end up being is old lady. I think she's just got more going on with her. She's a more entertaining character throughout, and I like the way that they make her almost a comedic relief while still giving her something important to do throughout.
Yeah, I think that's fair. She's entertaining early on, and then she's actually like by chance, like her skill set gets used. Like this idea that she can manipulate people, and then the fact that they kind of weaponize that to try and save everyone. I actually think, if anything, like I wish they went further with it. Like, you know, instead of like try to get the case immediately, like have her use her skills to try and get him talking and maybe find out something, or maybe see if she can, like, because maybe she can, like, oh, try and figure out if you can see where the detonator is, try and see if you can figure out something, and then go to the bathroom or come up for a snack and, like, you know, like tell us what you've seen. Yeah. So they could have done even more with that maybe, but that's it. I do think she's probably the wise choice. You know, little temptation to go with a nerdy kid just for the shits and giggles, but
yeah, why not?
But no,
I would say biggest mixed opportunity for me though is the culprit is the guy who actually has the bomb, because they do a little bit with him in the beginning to make him this more relatable character to show how down on his luck he is, but I don't feel like they ever really committed to that for fear of like making him too likable. Yeah,
they could have done like a whole thing where the bathroom stuff could have went on for a while, like rather than him almost immediately setting it off. There could have been like a conversation through the door or something. But I guess...
I think even just having him talk back to the captain when he's saying like it's not going to work out the way you want, and he just says, "Here's why I'm doing it. This is like all the things that went wrong and why I have to do this." And the captain just has to talk him down through that. Yeah, that's fair. All right. So with that MVP, so yeah, what are you rating the movie? So I feel like, is this probably, I don't know what you're expecting me to give it here, but I feel like you think I like it like a lot more than you. I don't think I do. I think that I did get a bit more enjoyment out of the first 30 minutes than you did, but I will agree that there are some issues in the back half regarding the climax. I think that is a major problem. And then again, I do have issues with the way that certain plots are just dropped off on. So all in all, I think I would probably end up giving this one, I'd say like 6. I think this is a pretty solid 6 for me. I'm just looking at all the other 70s disaster movies we did, and like I gave a 6.5 to Juggernaut, and I think that one has just a little bit more than this. Not a whole lot, but it's right around that same level. So I'll drop this one down to a 6 and call it there. Definitely better than the average 5, though. It's not a bad movie by any means.
Sure. No, actually, I'm also giving it a 6. All right. I think it's a decent movie with some really good parts and sections, and there's a nice old school kind of vibe to it, but it's also bogged down in some old school soap drama style stuff, and just some lost opportunities here or there. So very curious to see how it goes with the sequels. Now, I was smirking at one point during that because of two things. One, I looked up the second movie, mainly to see any other cast members popped up. The one that stuck out to me is not a returning actor, but a year after The Exorcist, Linda Blair is in the next one. Ooh. So that's going to be interesting. I did also read the synopsis, which I won't spoil, but I am excited by the premise.
All right.
I like how different it is. I'll just say that.
I mean, as long as it's doing something new, because it would be, as long as it's not doing the exact same, there's a bomb on the plane. No, it's definitely something different than that. All right. But the thing that I was laughing at, though, as I was looking, is that I just noticed in the genre tags, now it's got some things you expect. It's got disaster, it's got action, it's got drama, it's got thriller. All makes sense. Okay. But there was a fifth genre tag that just says horror.
Dark comedy.
Interesting choice.
I suspect that's someone's interpretation of some key scenes rather than what they intended. That's my bet.
Yeah, that's someone IMDb just having fun with it.
That's what my suspicion is, but yeah.
Fair enough.
Yes, Airport 1975 is next on the collector's cut. But it did come out in 74, which is why I said it was a year after The Exorcist, before someone corrects me.
That happens.
Yeah. I do believe the later sequels came out in the years that are in the titles, but 75 came out a year before, so.
They did, yep.
All right, so we'll see you next time for that. But, of course...
Oh, wait, did it make the cut?
Oh, did it? I don't know, did it?
I don't know. Yeah, this one's actually a little bit in the middle.
My gut says cutting it close.
Yeah, like I said, it's not bad enough. I don't think it's cupping the collection, but it is also not great either. So I think it's a good little middle baseline. I think
it's a weird one where I think that if you're interested in like filling out your movie history and you like disaster movies, or you really like Airplane perhaps, and you want to see sort of what inspired it, it's got some like utility there. But at the same time, I kind of get why it's not lasted in pop culture and why most people who like Airplane have never even heard of Airport.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, it's interesting from a filmmaking or not even filmmaking. That's not quite the word I should use. More just the Hollywood trends of certain eras. This is kind of an important part of the trend of the 70s for your Hollywood blockbusters. So, and keep in mind, this is before the term blockbuster was coined, because that was Jaws in 75 that kind of started that. But this, funnily enough, does feel like as close as you could get to a blockbuster before that time. These disaster movies were kind of hitting on that kind of type of movie before Jaws defined it and said this is a blockbuster. So interesting in that case. So sequel next week, of course. And if you want to support the show, you can get bonus monthly shows from us over on Patreon. It helps keep this show coming by sort of financing it, as well as all the other shows from Elfuzz Movies, such as Screams After Midnight, the horror movie podcast, or the other show that we do together, the Atomic Cinema Experiment, or sci-fi movie podcast. So check out those if you haven't. But if you want bonus monthly shows, they come in two flavors. One is the Criterion Cut, where we do movies from the Criterion Collection. It's pretty self-explanatory. And those tend to be really prestigious films, used often foreign or classic or something like that. And then there's
Armageddon.
No. Then there's Extra Reels, which is the worst movies ever made. So if that sounds like
Armageddon.
Fun, Armageddon's not that bad.
Nah, it's not.
It's not that bad.
It is in Criterion though.
There was a weird period at the end of the 90s where they put out a couple of mainstream movies like that for some, I don't know, money.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like the word is money.
Yeah. Trying to expand their audience, I guess, is maybe the other thing I would say. But
there you go.
Yeah. But we're not going to be... Don't worry. When we get to Armageddon or The Rock, they'll be done on the seasons of Collector's Cut.
Fair enough.
But yeah, so you go check out the bonus stuff. We got a Uwe Boll film coming soon on Extra Reels. I think that's next month.
We do. I forgot that. No.
We recently have just done Skyscraper, which was a Die Hard ripoff from the 90s. We did Hot Frosty for December. And, we're a good 25 plus episodes into that show now. So there's a whole back catalogue to sift through if you've not been on Patreon yet. But that is the show, everyone. So, thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully you enjoyed this admittedly combative episode of the Collector's Cut.
It'll only get worse from here. I'm slowly growing a spine.
You're just, Joe. The thing is, though, it's like you were oddly defensive of things that I could never have predicted that's what you would like pick a fight on. You know,
it's 100%. I don't see myself as being defensive. I see myself as explaining, and yet somehow it's interpreted as I will die on this hill.
You will die on that hill. I'll see to it.
I'll take it. If I don't die on the Collector's Cut, I expect that everything was not worth it.
There'll be many stabbings. So that is the show, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We do appreciate it. Keep watching movies. And if you can get it, it's always nice to have diplomatic immunity.